Then you vote for the suspension for lunch. We were debating order number 5 and 6, and therefore to that we shall return. Honourable Member and Leader of the Opposition.
I'm obliged to you, Your Honour. I expect, ma'am, that you will hold me to my promise to begin where I ended. And I had ended at the point where I was asking the government, challenging the government even, to produce some long overdue financial statement as to ministerial travel within the last year, certainly, that if this government comes here to boast that it has paid allowances to fisher folk in the sum of $4 million, prove that the government is properly allocating its resources by also telling the people of Barbados how much money the taxpayers are spending on these luxuries. The allowances for fisher folk are what we call in law necessaries, and ordinarily we would call them necessities, so that one would want to balance the cost of necessities against the cost of luxuries. The government may have to do a lot of persuading if it wishes to convince the population that ministerial and prime ministerial travel is more important to this country than this country's need and indeed obligation to support those persons among us who need social and financial protection. I don't think the payment of those allowances to the fisher folk are born of government's inclination to be nice, which they're not. It is born out of an obligation to protect the vulnerable among us. And indeed, that is why we have something called, for example, a welfare department. And if I spoke to a lady this week who has 6 children, and she is receiving $649 per month, then it means that government may have to be asked to relook the allocation of resources and to look at those persons among us who are vulnerable, and to look again at itself and to ask whether this country needs these luxuries or whether this country is gaining some overall benefit from these expenditures on these luxuries. If the government becomes tired of hearing me say this, sometime later in the year, they may have to think that I'm exhausted, because I'm not going to leave it. The people of this country, from whom the taxes are collected, are entitled to know how their taxes are spent. And a government must not be allowed to go on these expeditions without the scrutiny of the public, and certainly beyond the financial scrutiny of this public. And that is why we have checks and balances, no pun intended, in place on government spending. And the expenditure of $4 million on fisher folk who feed this country must be exposed to public scrutiny. And indeed, the minister who spoke today accepts that. And he has exposed that to public scrutiny.
On a point of order, I just want
Your point of order, sir?
on a point of order, I just want to,
What is your point of order, sir?
the member is misleading the House. When I spoke earlier, I said that over $7 million.
Oh,
Yeah, over $7 million was spent.
yes. I sincerely apologize. I had written for some reason or another, but I apologize to the honourable member so that I accept the minister's correction that so the honourable member can now make a bigger boast that I have spent $7 million on these hapless folk. Well, we've heard about the hapless folk. Let us hear about the happy folk who are ingesting champagne in the skies on private jets at the expense of the people of this country. It is a subject to which I return. If we have spent $7 million on hundreds of the hapless folk, let us hear how much has been spent on less than 30 of the happy folk. And maybe it is more than 30 of the happy folk, because from what we understand, those delegations are quite large. And we don't say this with any facetiousness, nor with any hint of sarcasm. Because in a country that is in the grips of the IMF, a country that's in the grips of an austerity program, every trip on land, on sea, or in the air must be justified. And we are not doing this to be malevolent. Every modern democracy subjects its public spending to scrutiny. There are no financial sacred cows in this democracy. In this parliamentary republic, there are none, or there is none. And I was saying, and I'm going to repeat, if this government believes that the people of this country are going to get tired of making that inquiry over the next few weeks and months, unless this government comes to the people of this country and gives a figure, they are going to have to accuse the people of this country of exhaustion from asking. We're not begging. The people of this country are entitled to know. These are taxes that are taken out of people's incomes. Please, government, I beg you, do as the other modern democracies do. Disclose every last penny of spending. And if you believe that the spending is unjustified, stop it. If you believe that it is justified, declare it. But you can no longer remain silent on this matter of public spending, particularly when, as we claim and will continue to claim, it is done to the disadvantage of the lady with 6 children who is getting $645 a month out of the welfare department. And by the way, she's unemployed. And we like to make judgments of people. And I know the judgments that will be made, because sometimes we can be so unkind in our judgments and unfair in our judgments that we may wish to ask a lady to account for the natural and beautiful act of procreation and lose focus of those innocent beings, children, that she created. And so we focus on the children of this country. And I said it this morning and I'll say it again. Too many of our children are at risk in making those judgments as to the parents and as to parental responsibility. Will we extend those judgments to the children and visit disadvantage on them? Whether we like it or not, you don't have to be a socialist nor a capitalist nor anything to consider that our innocent little children are innocent, and being so innocent, they are entitled to social protection. And I will continue at the risk of losing popularity. That is not my concern now. Justice is more urgent than popularity. And I suppose every politician, if he's honest with himself, will be interested in popularity. But there's something called principle. And principle dictates that we should be here to pursue justice. And we cannot claim to comfortably occupy a space in this country where our children are abandoned by the state. And I make bold to say that unaccounted government spending is tantamount to abandonment of children who have historically and traditionally been supported by the state. And if a government finds that a welfare department is underfunded, the government may have to look seriously at reallocating public resources. And I raise my voice when I say public because those resources are not private. They are public. They are public. On that, Your Honor, I will leave that topic and promise this government that I will return to it on every occasion that I find it necessary to do so. Because we must never in this country get comfortable with injustice. We must never get comfortable with injustice. Let the consciences remain in the state in which they find themselves today and tomorrow. I will revisit this topic at some propitious time in the future. And if the government finds it impossible to give the public of this country an answer within the next 24 hours, within the next week, or within the next month, we shall return to this. This country is due some accounting. I'm obliged to you on that topic, Your Honor. Let me move on to the legislation. Your Honor, the smaller of the two bills, at clause 10, struck me rather curiously. Disorderly behavior in public seafood markets. Permit me to read it, ma'am. We're trying to not only create, but to promote a new and sophisticated society and a new and sophisticated fishing environment. I want to invite the minister to review the need for clause 10. It presents a punitive character of the legislation. Why would you make legislation that governs a market environment and create a criminal offense for disorderly behavior? Are you saying to the public, and are you saying to the people who occupy those spaces, that they are in some way disposed culturally, historically, to disorderly behavior? A market is a place that is occupied by decent human beings, like anywhere else. People have been inclined to violence everywhere. Why must you legislate for a space called a market and make provision for the criminalization of, and I quote, disorderly behavior? I want to appeal to the minister to withdraw that from the legislation. At first glance, we, and when I say we, I mean the public, and even the people in the market may read it and pass it by. But there's this thing called the subconscious. And I wonder if within the subconsciousness of people, whether this clause in this statute is not reinforcing a stereotype that people in those markets, whether working or visiting, are in some way naturally inclined to disorderly conduct. Why say that? If there's disorderly conduct there, I think there's disorderly conduct everywhere. And if you're not going to reinforce that stereotype in other environments, why impose it? And why legislate it in the environment of a market? This, not only do I use the word stereotype, but it is a stigma. This is a legislative stigma that is placed on the occupiers of markets. And I'm begging this minister, this government, to remove that stigma, to remove that stereotype, to remove that provision within the law. But it is written, and it is written, and it is laden with value judgments. It is laden with prejudices. It is laden with stereotypes. And one may ask, where has it come from? It comes from a history of stereotyping of environments. It comes from a history of stereotyping the people who occupy those environments. And if one goes to almost any market, you're not going to see this prevalence of disorderly behavior. You see people working very hard. You see some of the fishermen playing dominoes. 6 mengs, for example. Oystins, another example. I don't go to the Bridgetown one. But there is sometimes no more placid environment than an environment in which fisherfolk congregate. And that is not to be patronizing. I think this is a valid defense of the industry. And in the defense of the industry, I am asking the government to remove this clause from within the legislation, which by its very existence stereotypes the people in these spaces as being in some way inclined to disorderly conduct. I will ask the government to consider that amendment before this becomes law, to remove that provision. We all hear the term unconscious bias. And several times we walk through life with these unconscious biases. We look at people and based on several social and physical characteristics, we hold biases. We hold biases about the way people wear their hair, about the way they dress. And sometimes we extend that to an immutable part of their body, and that is the skin. So all these unconscious biases and these prejudices that we hold, sometimes we find that we make legislation and that legislation embraces those unconscious biases, those stereotypes, those prejudices. And I feel comfortable asking this minister, this particular minister, the Honourable Member for Christchurch West Central, to take another look at Clause 10 of the, what I will call the small bill, and to give some serious consideration to excising, removing that clause from within the legislation, that clause that is punitive in its character, that clause that stereotypes, that clause that is laden with value judgments, that clause that is laden with prejudice, to remove it. And that if you don't insert that clause in any other legislation that seeks to regulate any other commercial activity, in 2025, this should not be in legislation dealing with fisher folk. I am sufficiently objective and honest that I am capable of congratulating the government for, in many ways, modernizing the facilities. There's Western, although it is not perfect. There's Bridgetown, it's not perfect. There's Oystons, it is not perfect. There's work needed to be done in the north. And if and when that work is done, it will not be perfect. But if one pauses honestly, one must sometimes say to the government, look, well done, well done. You have modernized the physical facility. But please, the legislative architecture needs to be modernized. The legislative infrastructure needs to be modernized. And we cannot claim to be passing modern law if we pass that law and include Clause 10. I will close on reading Clause 10 of this legislation so that the public fully understands the point that is being made. This is certainly not 2025 legislation. Permit me to read it, ma'am. A person who, in a public market, behaves in a disorderly manner, is guilty of an offense, and is liable on summary conviction to a fine of $1,000 or to imprisonment for 1 month. Again, we ask the question, why has that stipulation, why has that legislative provision been reserved for markets? I need not restate the point. Does this section, does this clause come laden with those value judgments, with those stereotypes, with those prejudices. Since disorderly behavior is rampant in this country, but you reserve the legislative condemnation for the market. And it is not fair to persons who occupy those spaces. It is certainly not fair. If something happens...
Madam Deputy Speaker, I raise a point of order. The honourable member is misleading this chamber. I gave him sufficient rope to try to reel himself back in, but he persisted in trying to draw it out to the baller. Prejudice would ensue if a bill was designed to capture one set of people and not others. The honourable member keeps referring to the fact that the government is attempting to stigmatize vendors, attempting to stigmatize the persons who work in the market. It does not say, the bill does not say people who work in the market and commit this act shall. It does not say vendors who work in the market and commit this act shall. It says a person, any person, the customer, the vagrant off the street, the man who runs in to cause mayhem or trouble. It may be a personal thing. This act is there to protect all persons who use the market, not just the vendors, not just the fisher folk, not just the boat owners. Anybody who steps foot in the market has to conduct themselves in a certain manner. This is not an anomaly. This is a law relating to markets. So at the point when we're dealing with markets, we put everything inside that piece of legislation that can govern any behavior happening in markets. If we were doing botanical gardens, no doubt something there, anybody who commits a trespass in a botanical garden is not saying that people who are in botanical gardens are predisposed to trespassing. The honourable member is trying to create, by his words, appears to be creating a mischief where none exists. This law is not specific in its application to a person. It is meant to govern behavior in a place. The place for the purpose of this legislation just happens to be markets, but it is not creating a mischief or prejudicing any particular class of persons or perpetuating a stereotype.
The point of elucidation is accepted. Your Honour?
Your Honour, if the goodly and of course honourable member for Christchurch East had listened to my submission, that goodly member would have heard me say that it seems to apply to all persons who occupy, whether they are working there or whether they're visitors there, which embraces all persons who visit the market. Now, I don't think it is the substance of a point to quarrel with an opinion. I don't know that one can quarrel with an opinion. If the honourable member...
Madam Deputy Speaker.
What do you stand, sir?
The honourable member
what
is
do you stand?
misleading the chamber again, right on a point of order. At no point did he propose this as, this is my opinion. He said the government is stigmatizing these people. The government insists on putting down this class. The government is doing this. That is not being tendered as a statement of opinion. That is being tendered as a fact. And while he may have at some point in time said it applies to everybody in the market, he keeps coming back around to the fact that we are trying to stigmatize or suggest that there's something less than with the persons who work in the market or who use the market. That is not the case. This is a protective piece of a clause meant to mean, he talked about order and good government. This is meant to maintain order in the market for everyone. This will end up protecting some of the same people he appears to be agitating on behalf of. The honourable member is stating things as a fact and when challenged, coming back saying that you can't fault an opinion.
Member, please.
I'm obliged to you, ma'am. When one says, or when one uses terms such as stereotyping, unconscious bias, prejudices, these are intangible qualities born of opinion. When you say that someone is stereotyping, that is not something physical that you touch. It is an opinion based on a substratum of fact. And the substratum of fact to which I referred was the historical image and reputation of these environments. And what I was submitting for those who understood was that in a modern Barbados, certainly in 2025, you did not wish to continue to stereotype opinion expressed. Because a stereotype is a judgment, and a judgment is an opinion. And you don't quarrel with a man's opinion. That is his opinion. And my opinion of the legislation based on that historical substratum of fact was and continues to be that it was a stereotype if we persisted with it in 2025. And all I was doing was asking a good government, a good one, to remove the legislation if it appeared to be perpetuating a stereotype. A stereotype. That is what one is asking the government to do. Now, I am quite capable, without being immodest, of engaging the member as to the judgments, as to the opinions, as to the stereotypes, as to the concept of unconscious bias and prejudice. I'm quite capable of that. But to be honest, I do not wish to do that with the Honourable Member. Today I do not wish to contend on respective opinions. I don't wish to do that, except that one must now acknowledge and accept that we are discussing opinions. And if I opine that legislation is capable of stereotyping, that is an opinion. Please, ma'am, do not allow a quarrel to emerge from the expression of an opinion. It is my opinion. And if the government is so gracious, all I'm doing, I can't force the government to accept my opinion. I can only encourage the government to accept an opinion that to stigmatize an environment with criminality is not the way that things ought to be done in a modern Barbados. That's what I'm asking. So there's no contention over respective opinions. But if the Honourable Member gets up and says that it is for the protection of people there, is the Honourable Member understanding for a minute that he is reinforcing the very point that I am making? That he is saying we passed this to create order in those places? And my response, where's the disorder? Where's the disorder that is there that is not in any other environment? So that the Honourable Member quite unwittingly reinforces the point I'm making as to stereotypes. He gets up, the Honourable Member gets up and says we are trying to protect the people in that environment from what? From a view, from an opinion, from a judgment that these places naturally incline to disorder? The honourable member is making precisely the point that I am making. The point that I'm making is that these places are not.
With respect, Madam Deputy Speaker,
What do you speak on, sir?
the honourable member, I raise a point of
Thank you.
order. This chamber is a lawmaking chamber, as the honourable member started off his address today by saying. We cannot use this chamber to corrupt the interpretation of law or the perception of law. The Highways Act contemplates certain offences committed on a highway. Does that mean, Madam Deputy Speaker, that we're saying all users of the highway are prone to criminality? This act being drafted to govern all behavior in the markets, to cover everything relating to the fish markets, it must contain provisions for order. And if we go to the extent that the government has taken a position, we're not trying to criminalize anybody. Where the offense is one that a civil penalty can suffice, we will go the civil penalty route, like possession, simple possession of marijuana, like vending without a license. So there's nothing saying that anybody who vends in there without a license is now a criminal. We're saying if you behave yourself in a manner that is not acceptable, you commit an offense. This does not trouble or touch or concern any person using the fish market who is going in there to buy fish. To buy the fish, pay the money and get out, need never worry about this. Any vendor in the fish market who's in there to sell the fish to people and behave themselves in an orderly manner need never worry about this. Any boat owner bringing in the fish to give to the vendor to sell, who plans to just do his business and leave and conduct himself in a professional manner, need never worry about this. This is meant for the situation where somebody, anybody steps out of line. And that behavior then, Madam Chair, is a criminal offense. The honourable member has been a lawyer for at least 30 years, 35, maybe 40, I don't know. I don't want to date him, maybe even 50. Right? He knows fully well how laws are drafted and what goes into laws. And the laws that create criminal offences are not meant to stigmatize the class of persons who may be contemplated by the law. It stigmatizes the class of persons who commit the offence.
Point is taken. Honourable member, here.
I'm much obliged to you,
Please
ma'am.
move on.
Yes. Beg your pardon, ma'am?
Let us please go forward.
Yes, let us go forward. Let us go forward. Let us go forward with the acknowledgement that the honourable member will sometime tonight discover how close his friendships are, because somebody will take him and explain to him what I was saying, and they will also explain to him, more importantly, what he is saying, what the honourable member is saying. A good friend, he needs a good friend tonight to explain to him that he is reinforcing the point that I was making, but he will test his friendships tonight. May I proceed, ma'am?
I'm going to need that too.
Beg your pardon, ma'am?
I will need that kind of explanation too. Because
Yes.
I'm not a lawyer, I'm a novice.
Yes.
But let us go forward, please.
Whoever are his friends, they will hold him tonight, sit him down, give him something to drink, preferably tea, and tell him, explain to him what he is saying. And so I return to the sobriety of the discussion in which I was saying to you, ma'am, for the ear of the honourable member for Christchurch West Central, that for the avoidance of stereotype, he may wish to redraft with the purpose and the intent of removing the clause entirely. And that if there's some broad principle that is established for the protection of all society, that it can be applied to any environment, the heart of man being wicked and flourishing like a green bay tree. Yes, honourable member.
On a point of elucidation, I just wanted to make it lucidly clear that we know full well that the market, the central tool of the market is a knife. And I'm fully aware that we
knife
all
and a sword.
understand. A knife and
knife and a
sword.
sword.
Yeah, we are aware of what happens in the market. They cut fish. But just to let the honourable member for Christchurch South know that the fish vendors, who he spoke so passionately about earlier, are the ones who asked for this particular clause in the legislation. And that is already in the existing legislation. It is in the Markets and Slaughterhouse Act as well, which governs the Ministry of Agriculture. But just to say that the vendors, out of fear of safety, asked for it to be included in this legislation during our stakeholder consultation. So I just want the honourable member to recognize that that was a request from the vendors.
Thank you, honourable member.
I will continue
Please do.
on the
On another note, please.
safe assumption that people innocently say things and that they may be causing embarrassment to their colleagues who are somewhat more conscious on these matters. And if the possession of a knife creates an environment of criminality and violence, well, you may have to go to all the kitchens, in all the restaurants across Barbados. There are long knives in there. And anywhere that there is a long knife, you may have to go up to NCC and all the people who cut the grass. You may have to pass a law for them. So please pass a law then for all people who work in kitchens with knives, all people who work at roadside with cutlasses. Please pass a law for them. Look,
Honourable member, I hate to interrupt you. I don't get involved in the debate.
yes.
But I understood differently what was
No,
explained.
ma'am, I beg your pardon. I beg your pardon. On the expression of opinions, I don't think that, and I can't tell you how to do your job. It's a very important job.
I know you can't.
To enter into the arena is not.
Let me just
I don't
finish
know
my
that
point,
that's the done
please.
thing. I know your honor will have an opinion, but your honor is occupying a position of impartiality. And the arena is not the place, with all due respect. And all I'm saying is that the two members who have spoken, I suspect one is innocent, and that what they have said is quite possibly exposing some of their colleagues who are conscious to embarrassment. And that if you insist that because a man is working in an environment with a knife, either he needs to be protected from himself or to protect others, well, go to the kitchens, the roadside, all over the place. Look, ma'am, let us proceed. Let us proceed.
Let us
because
go,
I think
please.
this is taking the government into deeper waters. And when you're in deep waters and you can't swim, you're likely to drown. And they're well on the way to losing their lives.
I'm not entering the debate. All I was saying is that the hallmark of what I'm understanding says that the not the debate now, but generally across Barbados, law and order is critical for us to be able to live in safe spaces and to work and shop and do everything. And that was only what I wanted to say from my understanding, but I'm not a part of the discussion of the debate. Unfortunately, I'm not in the usual position where I say I would have been able to make my contribution, but I will not do that because that is not my role right now. But could we please move on with the discussion, because we've been laboring this point for so long. And for me and for Barbadians, it is critical. But I'll give way to you so you can continue to conclude on that aspect of it in the light of the amount of work we still have to do. And unfortunately, with my old eyes, I cannot see well at night with the fussy lights that the guys are driving with. So let us all, please, we can do it together as a parliament, a chamber, discuss it with respect and move forward, because at the end of the day, the legislation has to be put in place because the people, whether they're fishermen or whoever, they all have to be able to live in peace and safety in every space across Barbados. So let us go forward, please.
And when I say that you're gracious, I always mean it.
I'm old enough to be gracious. Continue.
So that while we're talking about saving people from themselves, let me save this government from itself and move on to other topics, lest we should get another intervention of that nature. And I am sure good friends will descend on the gentleman, the Honourable Member for Christchurch East, and hold him in arms and teach him these lessons. Now, let us move on to another part of the legislation. I think I had touched in the larger bill. I had touched clause 269 previously. Again, if we are going to swim in deep waters, those who do not have life equipment, please stay on the sand. 269, as introduced by the Honourable Member for Christchurch West Central. Yes, this morning, the Honourable Member introduced this clause, this part, to this Parliament. And the Honourable Member titled it, as the legislation titles, Gender in Fisheries. And the subheading says, Gender Equality, Equity and Diversity in Fisheries Program. How noble, how noble. I did make reference to gender inequality this morning. Now here is the government bringing legislation to the Parliament. But I accuse this government of bringing legislation to this Parliament, and yet in its practices, defying what the legislation says. That there is a dissonance between government's legislative agenda and government's practice. Here is a government telling the Parliament, here's the government telling the people of Barbados that it is interested in gender equality, equity and diversity in fisheries program. In a fisheries program. When this government, as I said earlier, and I'm now going to contextualize it, this is not repetition, I'm going to contextualize government's policy within the legislation. And I said today that government is practicing gender inequality in its program of extending assistance to the fisher folk. And I said earlier, and I repeat, that government is yet to tell the people of this country, government is yet to tell the fishing industry, and I repeat, and I raise my voice so that all will hear. Government has not explained, Your Honor, why there is inequality in the assistance given to the fisher folk. And that government can be accused of gender inequality. I repeat what I said this morning, and I do it now for the purpose of context within the legislation. Why has the government given a one-off payment of $1,500 to the women who are vendors? And given in some cases, and in many cases, $9,000 to the men who are fishermen.
On a point of elucidation, I said earlier in my presentation of the bill that government in partnership, because they explained earlier that partnership must be an important cog of sustainable development, that we partnered with the Barbados Red Cross Society for the vendors to be given an $1,800 payment over a 3-month time. I also said, through the same Red Cross, that vouchers were also ascertained for the vendors and material to construct fish pots as well. Further to that, I said that the World Food Program, government also reached out and partnered with that program so that the fish vendors, again, who did not benefit from the Barbados Red Cross Society, can also get an $1,800 payment through the Western Union. The World Food Program also provided benefit for boat agents who did not receive financial assistance to the tune of $4,500. Thank you.
I always have respect for interventions from the Honourable Member for Christchurch West Central, who is a gentleman and a gentleman. And I know that he makes his interventions seriously and that he intends never to mislead. But sometimes people mislead innocently. And I am willing to, even privately, since I represent some of them legally and politically, I am willing to inform the Honourable Member for Christchurch West Central that in spite of Red Cross and all other crosses, that there are lady vendors in this country who have not received 1 cent. Now, if the Honourable Member is willing so to accept a list that I will give that Honourable Member, I will do so. Although I do also know that the Honourable Member will have access to that information in his fisheries division. That there are several persons within this country who ply a trade within the markets who have submitted their names for assistance. I almost called my parliamentary colleague's name. But there are persons who have not received 1 cent. And if his fisheries division, if the Honourable Member's fisheries division does not give him the information, I am willing to supply it. That is how we live. Because it is not the Honourable Member's private suffering, nor is it mine. This is the private suffering of people whom we both represent, Honourable Member, through you, ma'am. And I, by Friday next week, will hand the Honourable Member a list of persons. This is no byplay, this is no blood sport we're involving in now. These are people who are suffering. These are people who were promised $1,500 since last year. They have not received a cent. Some of them have migrated to other occupations in frustration. One, they don't have any money to buy the fish. And if it is imported fish, they don't have, I believe, a liberal credit system, which I believe some of them may enjoy with the local boat owners. A liberal credit system. That's how they operate. Highly sophisticated. So I am going to undertake now, ma'am, so that I do not have to return to this every month and tire the government. I am going to give the Honourable Member for Christchurch West Central a list of those persons who have not received any money, and we will settle this once and for all. Thank you very much. I believe you're sincere. So I was coming back to the question of gender in fisheries. Again, if this debate is to be conducted with maturity, objectivity, honesty and integrity, I will ask this government to remove the discriminatory treatment that exists within this program against women. That if this government is to remain faithful to the letter of this legislation, and I say this seriously, ma'am, honorable member through you, ma'am, I say this in all honesty. If the legislation is not meeting the practice, the policy, I don't think the legislation needs correcting, because I support this, that there must be gender equality. We've come too far. And if the legislation is not meeting the policy and the practice of government, there's no need to fix the legislation. Let us fix the policy and the practice. And the practice is that the women who have carried the fisherfolk industry for years and years, they are in the majority. They are in the majority, so that they constitute the human bedrock of the industry, and they are being treated in a discriminatory fashion. So they are not going to be relying on the raid, I almost say the raid, something else, tell the truth. The raid cross, I almost say the raid, something else. But that is coming soon, by the way. I ain't frightened, I am not afraid. So that the government is discriminating against the women within the fisherfolk profession. And I'm asking government to correct that. And I am asking government to bring the women on parity with the men. Again, this is an opinion. Do not reinforce the stereotypes that the men have made some greater contribution to the industry and that the women have made a lesser contribution. If the men get 9,000, give the women 9,000. The social reality in this country, I am a man and I am a parent. And I am a good parent. I'm a good parent and a good man too, incidentally. And even I recognize that the major burden of childcare has historically rested on women. And when the women suffer, the children are deprived. I'm not saying that the men are not good fathers, but we know that historically, the burden, the responsibility of parenthood has been largely carried by the women. And I know, Your Honor, I know that you agree with me on that. When normal service resumes, I'm going to repeat it.
I heard you say it.
And you agree with me.
No, I can't.
No, I'm not asking you. I am asserting that you agree with me, ma'am. I've spoken to you before. Not that I am going to disclose our private exchanges, but I know that you are a Barbadian lady who has represented a constituency for the last 24 years. And Your Honor has not been a deputy speaker for the last 24 years. Your Honor has been heading a ministry that is now headed by the Honourable member for St. Michael South. And that you are conscientious, and not only conscientious, but conscious. And not only are you conscientious and conscious, but you are knowledgeable as to the social realities that exist in this country. And you know, ma'am, you know, I'm not asking, I'm asserting to you that you know that the women in this country have carried the burden of parenting. Yet, here is a government prepared to discriminate against them and to turn to the Red, have to be very careful, Red Cross. The Red Cross. And still they can't reach 9,000. But why do they give the men $9,000? I don't begrudge the men the contribution of 9,000 because those men are involved in the lives of women.
I think it should be withdrawn. When
the tea comes tonight, they will also be told that, they will be reminded that I said that the majority of boat owners and fishermen are male. And they will be reminded after they sip their tea that I say that the majority of vendors are female. They will be reminded of that. And I don't want them to forget. So may I press on, ma'am?
Yes, please.
I am so
When you sip your
obliged.
tea with them later, you can discuss.
I won't be there with them. They're
It's a
poisoning
pity.
me.
I'll continue, sir.
Thank you, ma'am. So that amidst those protestations from the other side, I still insist that clause 269 is now in fierce competition against the policy of the government and the practice of the government, and that there is a dissonance between the policy and practice of the government and the letter of the law which the government has come here today to pass. Again, I say and I undertake to give to the Honourable Member for Christchurch West Central a list of those persons, considerable in number, who have not received any assistance. I will give that to the Honourable Member. I can even show the Honourable Member my telephone, the WhatsApp messages that I received in here today while the Honourable Member was speaking, but that's not properly evidence before court, and it certainly is not evidence in here. All it is the truth. And the truth on my phone from WhatsApp messages is that they were saying that what the Honourable Member for Christchurch West Central was saying was not in every aspect correct. That's what they were saying. And I am willing to show him the WhatsApp messages as well, because I want this matter resolved. It is as if I am representing a client in court. I want it resolved. And I want it resolved not to my political advantage, nor to his political disadvantage, but I want the people to get some money. That is what we want. And he will be happy, the Honourable Member will be happy, and I will be happy. And perhaps the member for Christchurch East will be unhappy. But this is not a transaction between the two of us. That gentleman, the Honourable Member for Christchurch West Central, he is my concern right now. I am concerned for his political plight at this point in time. Please get it right, and you will have a political plight that will be all right. We will want to wrap up by making a few other recommendations to the Honourable Member for Christchurch West Central. I am not sure if the legislation, they have a way of presenting me with the legislation when I walk in here. I am the most overworked man in this country.
Overpaid.
I have to
Overpaid.
overweight.
Overpaid.
Yes. I admit that. Look, ma'am, that's probably the Honourable Member for St. Lucie. You heard his phone. You heard his phone, ma'am. And no pun, you were alarmed.
Please continue.
And he doesn't even know the phone is ringing.
Please continue.
Look, he got it.
I'll continue, Your Honour. Continue, sir, with the two areas on the order paper we are discussing. Honourable members, please allow the Honourable
Calm them down,
Leader of
calm
the
them down. Yes,
Opposition
calm them down,
to
ma'am.
continue.
Calm them down.
Give him the respect
I
that is
prefer
due,
when you were
please.
there, you know, ma'am. Calm them down. Settle them.
Allow him, please, to continue. Never mind the asides to you, sir, but let him continue. You can deal with him on the outside. Continue, sir.
Yes, thank you, ma'am. So that one of the issues that arose out of this entire event, calamitous as it was the issue of insurance. And the public, again, exercised some very harsh judgments against the fisher folk. And one of the most depressing activities is to read the things that people say on social media. I mean, people really, the public social media has unleashed sometimes a kind of bitterness. And you begin to wonder if people sit for an entire day and night and just think of the most unkind things to say in a public domain. Some enjoy anonymity, and some are quite willing to expose themselves and that aspect of themselves to the public. I mean, they do say some really unkind things, and there's a small clique, and every newspaper report that goes online, my goodness, they do say some really harsh things about people. And as I said, I don't think it is a large segment of persons, because I see the same names repeated. And one of the judgments that they made was a condemnation of the fisher folk because they did not have insurance. Now, there is no law, and the absence of the law does not make it moral. But there is no law that compels a man to insure his boat. It's a voluntary act. And in the aftermath of the disaster, they were condemned for not having insurance. And one gentleman, whose name I shall not call, explained that if he were to insure his boats, his profits would be almost non-existent. And again, we make judgments and we accuse people of not telling the truth. And I mean, a judgment is a heavy, heavy burden on those who are judged. And they told the public, they say they sat on this medium called Facebook, and oh man, not a cent. They could have gone and get insurance. And the gentleman was there pleading, look, if I insured, I would not make a profit. You know, sometimes we have to reach in to our hearts if we're capable of doing that, and try to accept the goodness in others, the possibility that the other person is telling the truth, or maybe telling the truth, even if we get tricked by what he is saying. But the goodness in our heart sometimes tells us, look, accept what the other man is saying. Accept that people behave rationally. Accept that if a man does not insure his boat, he is taking a chance that nothing will go wrong with his boat, and he will be able to make some money. And that's a rational decision. It becomes irrational if his boat meets disaster and he cannot find compensation for his failure to insure. The point I make here, Your Honor, is that this crisis exposed another crisis of under-insurance, or a lack of insurance in the industry. And I was hoping that the legislation would have in some way, although I believe it was drafted long before the event of the hurricane, I believe that, all 300 plus pages, drafted by expertise. If it has a clause dealing on insurance, I have not seen it. If it is there, the Honourable Member for Christchurch West Central will tell us that it is there. But I don't recall seeing it in the short time they pushed this at me and asked me to listen to the Honourable Member for Christchurch West Central, read the legislation, and respond to noise from elsewhere. So it sometimes is a difficult job to do, but in doing that, I am not averse to hard work. And in doing that job, I would like to encourage the Honourable Member for Christchurch West Central to look at this question of insurance, because it will become an issue. Is there? Oh, thank you very much. And within that scheme of insurance, it is not compulsory though. within that scheme of insurance to, beg your pardon? Oh, within that scheme of insurance to ask the government to exercise some moral suasion, and to not only exercise moral suasion, but to incentivize it. And moral suasion would involve and include the act of bringing the fisher folk in, and not the fisher folk generally, but the boat owners in. They normally talk about education. Educate people. Yes, sometimes you do need to educate people. And you bring in the stakeholders. I'm using the terms now that have become so fashionable around here. You bring in all the stakeholders, and those stakeholders would be the boat owners, the government officials, and the members of the insurance companies. That is why a government is there. A government regulates relations between commercial partners. And sometimes the government is called upon to incentivize. As the government, as we know, the government incentivizes in all the other industries, agriculture, tourism. There are always concessions and tax breaks given to other people. My paper earlier said that we have over 1,100 vessels, 1,300, about 1,100 and something vessels that do not collide with each other at all. You can have an entire life without a vessel colliding. You hardly ever hear of the sinking of a vessel. So that one would want to suggest, and a good government would want to suggest, that it is a risk of low cost, that an insurance company could still make money if morally swayed by the government to insure the people's boats, and insure the people's boats not to their disadvantage, not to cause them not to make any profits, but ultimately to protect them. That is how good governments function. Moral suasion. Central banks do it in relation to the commercial banking system, and these are powerful people. Moral suasion is a technique in bringing people to act reasonably. And so, whatever the legislation says, I am sure the Honourable Member for Christchurch West Central, if he is not, if this portfolio is not transferred from him soon, because it used to be further south, and it has now migrated down the bench. I see the Honourable Member for St. James South waving her finger, and she's probably waiting for a piece of fisheries as well at some point in time. So that who knows by the middle of the year who will have this portfolio. So whoever has this portfolio by the middle of the year, please consider the act of moral suasion in a tripartite meeting between the government officials, the insurance companies, and the boat owners, and do not exclude the National Union of Fisher Folk Associations. I think that's the name. Do not exclude the National Union. The National Fisher Folk Union. I don't remember the name, but please include that union in the discussions. The point we were making as an amateur's intervention was that the number of boats against the prospect and the possibility of incidents means that you're not going to have an incident every day. You have a motor vehicle accident every day, sometimes every minute of the day. That doesn't happen in the boating industry. So I want to encourage the Honourable Member for Christchurch West Central to become a hero. This could be his finest hour. He could be the one emerging from these discussions and pushing open the doors and boasting to the public, look, I found a solution. Of course, the arrangement in which he finds himself, he would have done the hard work, but they're not going to give him the credit. I know what I'm speaking about. He will not get the credit, but I am telling him today through you, ma'am, go and do this. And when you've done it, get to the media first. Do not let them pull you back. Get to the media first. One person cannot take all of the credit for your work. A word to the wise. A word to the wise. His colleagues laugh in approval of the advice that I have given to him. They now have to sneak out and get credit. And you will recall that he began, the honorable member began his speech by saying it started with the vision of the honorable member for St. Michael Northeast. Let this end with your vision. I'm not even going to take credit. The credit should be yours. Let this end with the vision of the honorable member for Christchurch West Central. You will be the hero for having established a scheme of insurance so that when the next hurricane comes, the boat owners in this country can feel protected. My advice, Your Honor, has had some worth, some value. Because when this incident occurred, and after it occurred, I told the government those boats should not have been bundled up in that close harbor. And I told them go down by Baiko and put the boats out there. I told them go to Dickens Road and put the boats out there. You know, I drove by there today. Ma'am, where do you think the boats are? Little old me. The boats are out there, honorable member for Christchurch East. They're out there. They're out there. The government took my advice. And when you leave here, I want you to drive past Sheffet on Harbour Road and see the boats down there where and I'm not being immodest here, I told the government to put them down there. So, honorable member for Christchurch West Central, will hear through you, ma'am, that the government has been listening to me. The government has been listening to me, and they pilloried me for saying that the boats ought to have been on dry land as opposed to being in a water-driven environment to crash against each other and destroy. Up to now, some of them still at the bottom of the harbor. Now, after my advice, they have put them on dry land down by Baiko where I say to put them. I'm no genius. I'm no nuclear scientist. I just got a little common sense.
Continue on.
I thank you so much, ma'am, for taking the honorable member.
Don't pay the asides any attention, please. I'm not hearing you.
If they weren't so loud. The asides are very loud, you know, ma'am.
I'm listening to you attentively.
Thank you, ma'am. So that I am inviting the honorable member for Christchurch West Central to meet his finest hour and to have a scheme of insurance. I leave him with the news, the message that the fisher folk industry is not happy. Honorable member, I want you to know that. The fisher folk community is not happy. Don't accept my word for it. Go to the markets of this country and discover what I've told you. They are not happy. I don't know if this government can retrieve its position of good favor with the fisher folk community. I don't know if it has gone permanently. But in spite of a good speech, you know, the honorable member did a good speech today. All of his technocrats, I'm sure, were very happy with him. And he started off to great applause in the style of the branch meeting. And then he became very sober and, as he ought to have done, went through the legislation, and that was admirable. I really respected that. But after that, the government's favorable rating has not been retrieved. And I am inviting him to find a way to retrieve it, not only by accepting my advice and putting the boats on dry land, but in revisiting those hapless persons, he being a happy legislator. The happy legislator must now go to the hapless boat people, fisher folk people, and find that they are unhappy, discover the source of their unhappiness, discover that divide and rule is not a proper modern policy in a new republic, that you can't divide them as a means of getting the support of some at the expense of others. Because I want to visit the honorable member with the news today that the unhappiness of some has resulted in the unhappiness of all. I say that to the honorable member in all seriousness. He has a chance, the honorable member has a chance to leave here today and to visit a market. If he's afraid, I'll go with him. I will go with him. I go to St. Peter. Now, Section 20 of the large document, I like to look at these things objectively, is invasive. Let us read it so that the Honourable Member for Christchurch West Central, who seems now to be interested in accepting good advice, will look at it. Should I read the whole thing? I shan't do so. But I will summarize to say that Part 5, which the Honourable Member read, which deals with data and information, and the legislation requires the persons involved in the industry to supply data and information. Now, what is that data and information supposed to cover? The data and information, well, it says, of course, any person engaged in fishing or in fishing-related activities who engages in overseas trade in fish and fish products or processes, cultures, or sells fish or fish products. Obviously, you don't come here and question everything because you can, but the government always wants to ensure safety because you're dealing with food and you don't want your food reaching the table in a state which can make people ill or even kill them. So one can understand government's need and the requirement that a responsible government should monitor all these activities. But then it goes on to say the data or information in respect of subsection 1 may include, and here's the data, any data or information relating to fishing, fisheries, aquaculture, landings, research, storage, food safety, processing, buying, selling, exports or imports of fish and other related activities, and accounts, records, returns, and documents. I want to say, ma'am, that is a very heavy responsibility. You may have heard it here today that markets, not from me, but you may have heard that with the presence of knives and sharp tools, that markets are naturally given to violence. Now, you may have heard that. I don't agree with it, but you may have heard it, ma'am. But he doesn't need that meeting tonight. He's now coming to a Christian understanding. With a little education, he has relieved himself of those prejudices, of that unconscious bias, of those stereotypes, and he is now reversing, he is now withdrawing.
Who's the he, sir? On the fisherman you're referring to?
He, H-E.
Are you referring to another member of this chamber or something?
He. Just accept he, ma'am. I am the one I am the one who's speaking, and you have asked me not to respond to what is said in here, and I am accepting your ruling and your advice. And he is now coming to a Christian understanding that because a man has a long sharp knife does not naturally dispose him to violence, and that there is therefore no need to pass a law against his disorderly conduct. He. Get it, he.
Honourable Member, you were doing fine these last 10 minutes. Please kindly address the Honourable Member to whom you're referring. Whether it is
I am saying
hold on,
he.
please, kindly hold. Take a place. Whether it is the member who is sitting right here at the end of this chamber, is this the east? Yeah, or any other member at the end, or another member near to you. We are all honorable members, and as I've said before and will continue to say, respect is due to everyone, whether it's a member of this honorable chamber or the ordinary Barbadian out there. So, sir, if you're referring to one of these honorable members here, please address that member in the manner that I know you would do. And I wish you to continue to be on that track.
Thank you, ma'am. Your Honor.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I raised an point of order. And the reason I raise it is that it's necessary for the record of the chamber to reflect something. This honourable member is breaching the standing orders in disrespecting other members of the chamber. Now, what makes this striking, Madam Chair, the only person that the honourable member had interactions with during this, with the exception of the person who presented the bill, is myself. So the only person he could possibly, the honourable member could possibly be referring to is me. So I wish to start by saying, I never said, never, not once said that the marketplace, because knives are present in the marketplace, is predisposed to violence or is a naturally violent place. I never said that. The other thing, so he's misleading on that. The other thing, ma'am, that I wish to address with respect to the disrespect, this same honourable member got up in this same chamber 2 sittings ago and went to town on the fact that he was not being referred to as the honourable member and somebody referred to him as he. The speaker at that point in time explained to the honourable member that having identified the person you're speaking to, you don't have to keep saying the honourable member, the honourable member, the honourable member. You may say he, but the respect must be given. This same honourable member insisted that a reference to him as he was disrespectful. And this same honourable member, ma'am, you asked him, this chair asked him to identify the person being referred to. You asked him twice, ma'am, and the honourable member refused. I had cause, ma'am, to learn a phrase from to learn a sign from the sign language people, from the persons who interpret for the hearing impaired. Ma'am, and I learned that this means hypocrite, right? That means hypocrite. The honourable member needs to pick exactly which rules apply specifically to this side and which rules apply to the honourable member. But ma'am, that was a disrespect. I'm glad you ruled on it, but I needed for the record to point out that the honourable member argues on one side of his mouth when it refers to him and another side of his mouth when it refers to everybody else.
Honourable member, please.
I'm obliged to you, ma'am, please. Thank you, ma'am, thank you.
Let us continue to show the respect as we go forward. Continue, sir.
You heard the other voice, they cursed in
I
cabinet.
did not, excuse me, sir, I did not hear. I did not hear. That's not the only curse you're getting. You're getting from your party. No, please, let us continue to do it as civilized citizens who have to set the standard for the rest of this country and particularly the young people.
Of course.
So let us continue on that trajectory, sir.
Of course.
On either side, we will respect
side,
each other. That is what this honourable chamber demands.
Yes.
And we shall follow as leaders of this country. The eyes are on us. Let us do it right every time.
Yes.
Thank you, sir. Please continue.
I'm going along very calmly.
Please continue on that trajectory.
Thank you, ma'am.
Addressing honourable members in the way we know it is according to the standing orders.
I don't know why people feel that they are referred to as he. I don't know. But
honourable member, we've all been to school.
Let us
even if we didn't learn the same way and have degrees and so we understand. But let us, in an amicable way this bright Friday afternoon, let us continue to show the respect across the floor.
Yes.
Thank you.
That is not difficult for me. So that we were on to, data. And I was about to say that there's a heavy burden imposed on fisher folk to produce accounts, records, returns, and documents. Now, one understands the practical difficulty of that stipulation. Sometimes you draft legislation while being insulated from the reality. Sometimes you may even lift that legislation. I know how a lot of legislation is drafted. You lift it. without regard to the peculiarities of what you seek to legislate upon. And we all know, living in the real world, that we walk up to the fish vendor and we ask for 5 pounds of dolphin, or quantity of flying fish or red fish, and we know what obtains. The person who is cutting, and as we say in the shops, dispatching, is the same person who is transacting the money. And I'm not aware that I have ever seen any fish vendor acting in compliance with what this legislation now requires, that he or she, in the majority of cases, she, will be required to produce accounts, records, returns, and documents. Now, one tries to be fair even to a government that is misguided. And one will want to urge a misguided government to, if it requires those records at all, to do so at the stage where they may be doing the wholesale transaction. That is to say, the boat comes in and the wholesale transaction would be where you purchase the quantity of fish for further resale. The vendor retails, the boat owner wholesales. And if the government is going to be pushed at all to insist on this stipulation, let it be at a stage where it is practically more feasible, rather than to ask every fish vendor at the point of sale to pause, write up a receipt, and do all that this legislation says should be done. Maybe the draftsman himself has been insulated from the realities of the fish markets and fish market transactions. It doesn't happen like that. And so that is another example, that is yet another example of a dissonance between legislative intent and practical experience. I'm not going to accuse somebody of not knowing what goes on in the market, but this certainly does not happen in the markets. And to impose it is a rather heavy imposition. Those are not the only examples of this legislation finding itself in disagreement with practice, but it is voluminous. It is rather voluminous. I can turn to just about every other page and offer the criticism that I promised earlier this morning, but I'm not going to burden you with excessive criticism. I'm not going to burden you even with a prolix presentation. What I will do, I will close, ma'am, by saying to you that there's much in this legislation that requires amendment. I am going to ask the government to return and amend, and particularly to amend that section to which I referred, that section that troubled certain parties, and I can understand why it troubled those parties. That clause 10, and I insist that clause 10 is dangerous. It really is dangerous. And as was heard, I wouldn't say where, as was heard, people who work around knives need to be controlled. And that is the essence of what has been said. If you work with a knife, you try and control yourself. If I can't control you, I will pass a law to control you. This is modern Barbados. This is
Madam Deputy Speaker, seeing that we are at this, the Honourable Member is misleading the chamber again. Nowhere was it said that persons with knives need to be controlled. Nowhere was it said that. We took great pains to explain when the member was casting his unfounded allegations far and wide and being reckless with his comments, that the law is meant to protect all. It protects the person who walks in, it protects the person who's purchasing, it protects the person who's selling, it protects the boat owner. Anybody inside the vicinity or the purview of the market is protected under this legislation from somebody looking to cause mischiefs. Nowhere was it. Perhaps, Madam Speaker, Deputy Speaker, the only thing I can be left to assume or come to the conclusion of is that the Honourable Member is actually projecting his own opinion of the fisher folk on the government of Barbados. But that is clearly not the position of the government of Barbados. The Honourable Member keeps going back there. Maybe he has some other axe to grind or some other point to prove. But he cannot keep trying to misinterpret where we have said over and over that is not the position of this government. This was not meant to pick out any particular person. It was not meant to stigmatize any particular person. This is protective more than punitive.
Your point is taken, sir. Honourable Member, please continue.
Thank you very much, ma'am. Section 10 exists. It has not yet become law. And let the record clearly reflect that I am opposed to Section 10. That I do not believe that that punitive section or the punitive character of that section should exist within this legislation. And if anyone in this chamber believes that it should be there, let him stand or fall by his belief. I have no doubt that there will be those who think that it should be there and that their belief is innocently held. That it is quite possible that there are some persons who never thought of it, but that when those conscious and conscientious and intelligent persons think of it, they'll say yes. Why should we stereotype that area of human activity without having stereotyped any other area of human commercial activity? Why do we go to the fish market? And when they think about it, they will say, you know, the gentleman has a point. The gentleman has said, that it is a stereotype. I'm thinking about it now, he may have a point. Because this is not the only environment with sharp instruments. And they may say that the gentleman has a point, because if he's saying that the heart of man is wicked, based on very high authority, those of us who have Bibles and read them, and that the wicked flourish like a green bay tree, that could apply to any environment. And that we probably should not be passing legislation that disparages an entire community. And when they think of it, they may well agree. So that for the protection of the government and for the protection of one's own personal image, I would like to strongly recommend that any further argumentation should cease, because the point is made. The point is made, and well made, speaking as modestly as I can do, that it stereotypes, it imposes a certain stigma against certain people. And even they, I heard the Honourable Member for Christchurch West Central say that they wanted it. That community is not the only community exposed to violence from outsiders. There are several communities that are exposed to violence from outsiders, but we come back to the point. And I'm sorry we had to come back here, because I thought it was settled by quiet acceptance from those who strongly believe that Section 10 must be kept. There are those who will strongly believe that Section 10 will be kept. I will ask them to have a quiet word, not only with themselves, but with the minister, and perhaps even the Lord, and to concede and accept that it is really not necessary. It is not necessary, in spite of what the Honourable Member for Christchurch West Central said about the people wanting it. The largest sin is that it disparages an entire community. And as I've said before, and permit me to repeat this, ma'am, I have myself never seen any act of violence in a market. I suppose there have been acts of violence committed in markets. If you want to see violence, I could take you to a lot of streets in Barbados now. But this legislation is telling the people who work and visit markets that there's violence lurking just beneath the surface, and unless we pass a law to protect and to prevent, that violence will erupt from underneath that thin veneer.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I don't
How do you
know.
stand, sir?
The Honourable Member is once again, point of order. Honourable Member is misleading the Chamber again. Madam Deputy Speaker, no statement was made. The only person who is suggesting or keeps hammering the point that the market is a place with an undercurrent of violence bubbling below the surface, getting ready, in his own words, to erupt, is the Honourable Member for Christchurch South. Ma'am, since the 13th of September 1958 was the commencement of the Market and Slaughterhouses Act. Since then, the exact same provision has been in the legislation. Since 1958, I can't even do the mathematics to tell you how long that was. So, madam, this passed through every government Barbados since independence. Every government that ever was in Barbados has operated under this. Every market there ever was in Barbados has operated under this. Every fish market that exists right now has operated under this. It is not that the government is sticking in something that was not there before. And when you're doing law revision, the Honourable CPC is here as well. You have to have a reason for taking out clause or omitting things. If something is there to protect, you don't pull it out willy-nilly unless there's a good reason for it. Obviously, the Honourable Member has never read the Market and Slaughterhouses Act. Obviously, he has no idea of the legislation governing markets in Barbados. Ma'am, this government has not put it in. There can be no imputation of anything on the part of this government to stigmatize, look down on, frown, bracket a certain segment of our community. The fact remains by this, the Honourable Member has said, we've given over $7 million in assistance. All the markets have been upgraded. We're trying to repair the breakwaters. We're repairing the port. Everybody, we try to assist, the government tried to assist post-Elsa and this disaster. Does that sound like the actions of a government who looks down on a segment of the population? The only person, and I want this for the record, the only person who is spewing this garbage is the Honourable Member for Christchurch South. Having said that, what he does from here on now, I will not object again. What he does from here on now can only be construed as him trying to drive his opinion of the people he is speaking about, who he's supposed to be representing. Thank you, ma'am.
Honourable, your position?
3 words.
I love you.
You.
No.
You.
No.
You're eminently lovable. But the 3 words, extrication by distortion. Let the Honourable Member for Christchurch East attempt to extricate himself from a difficult position by distorting. And what that honourable member will hear for the umpteenth time is that support of Section 10 is support for a stereotype. And that anybody who is opposed to this stereotype will gently ask to have it removed. So that is that.
Yes, sir.
It has never been my endeavor to level playing fields. Never been my endeavor to level playing fields. So I will press on. Come to public life to level playing fields. I would like to turn off anyhow. Come to public life to level playing fields, always seeking approval from the people that despise you. People despise you and you're always seeking approval. Now, ma'am, let us wrap up my contribution to this legislation by saying that the industry obviously needs regulation, but that it does not need regulation to the disadvantage of those who participate in the industry. And I have pointed to certain portions of the legislation that disadvantage those persons critically and centrally involved in the industry, and I won't do it again. And I have pointed to the disconnection, the dissonance if you prefer, to government's policy and the letter of this legislation, and to say to this House and to this public that this legislation seems to be traveling in a direction that is academic and theoretical, except that government is traveling in a direction that is not in the interests of the industry. In other words, this legislation, as I say this morning, and I say this without apology, this legislation as drafted reads very sweetly, but that sweetness does not extend itself to the way that government is treating the industry, and that is no criticism of the draftsperson, that is no criticism of he or she who has been hired to draft legislation for the regulation of an industry. The sin here today, and the sin that has been continuing for the last few months, is that the industry has been neglected and ill-treated by a government that lacks compassion towards the members of the industry. And that is why there's so much widespread dissatisfaction with the way in which government is treating the industry. And I go further and say that at every market, there's a repeated infrastructural problem, and I say repeated, that every few weeks, sometimes every few months, admittedly, the ice machines are not working. Certainly at Western, which is brand new, and we've applauded the government for building a brand new market, but it is not functioning in every aspect like a brand new market. It is not. So legislation is fine, but this government needs to bring itself to improving the infrastructure. This government needs to bring itself to modernizing Oistins in a way that accommodates the large number of boat owners, I beg your pardon, who reside, work, and operate, and even recreate in that southern portion of the island. A few years ago, and this is no personal or professional criticism of anyone, but we put a proposal to government to modernize that boatyard with a slipway for the haulage of boats up into the safety of a boatyard. Oistins is one of the few facilities that has a solid boatyard, terra firma, right next to the ocean. And we came up with more than one solution to the problem of boats having to have been kept in a confined area at Bridgetown. If the government had done then what we, and I don't say we brought engineers here. 4 engineers met at that facility, and this is no personal or professional criticism of anyone. I am speaking about government's dereliction in its duty to properly protect an industry against the hazards, against the elements. And if government had done that, some of those boats would have been on terra firma in Oistins, having come up from the sea on the vehicle that we proposed to the government ought to have been bought. We even came up with a price for the vehicle. Nothing was done, and what was done by the elements, and in a confined space. 90+% of the boats in the industry met destruction while the World Cup was going on, or while the World Cup was pending, while government was engaging in luxurious behavior, while a hurricane threatened, and while a minister in this government came afterwards and admitted that government had the technology to appreciate the severity of the hurricane, the event, and did nothing. The government was at cricket. Cricket took priority over the safety and the protection of an industry. I came very calm this afternoon, but I'm wrapping up. And this government must learn to accept criticism. This government must cease its intolerance to constructive criticism. And that is why what occurred on Wednesday is still causing ripples in this country. Don't ask me what occurred on Wednesday. The whole world knows what occurred on Wednesday. Gather within your bosoms, government, a tolerance to intelligent and constructive criticism, and stop believing that you are beyond government, that you are beyond criticism. You are not beyond criticism. You are not beyond criticism. Every instance of criticism is driving people to fear. It is not going to drive me to fear. Not going to drive me to fear. I am not afraid of any of you. Understand that. Understand that. Understand that now. And if there are others afraid, Your Honor, I am addressing you, ma'am.
I just want you, Madam Member, to explain in what context you're referring about being afraid.
Afraid?
What context are
I
you
am not afraid to criticize the government.
to criticize, oh.
I am not afraid to criticize the government.
That was not clear.
And if I were afraid to criticize the government, I would be breaching my constitutional responsibility and my public responsibility. So it is not only Deuteronomy 31:6, I believe, ma'am, John 14:27, about which you and I spoke a few weeks ago. I am not afraid. I am not afraid to criticize this fallible government. So that if Wednesday, if 48 hours ago, troubles the bosom of this government, look for some more trouble, government. Look for some more trouble in the camp. Look for some more. And stop coming in to public office with the arrogance that you are not subject to criticism. The government is subject to criticism. Who does this government think it is? And when criticism is due, it will be heard. And if it is not heard on a Wednesday, it will be heard on a Tuesday. And if things are scheduled for Friday, it will be heard on Fridays. And so when I stand in this position and have to endure insult, abuse, asides, loud, silent, I will endure it. But it will not deter me, because the public is watching. The public is looking on at a government that is intolerant to criticism, and the public is judging. Understand that, government. Understand that. And the occasional smile, don't be misled by it. Don't be misled by it. I know how to smile and when to smile. But I know how the public feels. And I know that the public is not happy, and we're on fishing legislation, and I know that the fishing community is not happy. And I know that the fishing community is not happy by this government's practice and present practice of trying to divide and rule the industry by rewarding some, compensating some, and excluding the others. It is wrong. It is politically and morally wrong. And it must come to an end. And whoever feels badly about it, let them feel badly. This government is not behaving like a good government. Your Honor, I am obliged to you.
Honourable Member for St. Michael South.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. I must thank the Honourable Leader of the Opposition. I have had my entire life an appreciation for theatre. And this position has prevented me from attending many community-based programs where I had the opportunity to enjoy good community-based theatre, and I've missed it. Even though I subject myself to theatre of the poorest kind, I still find it somewhat appealing. I must also say, Madam Deputy Speaker, as I listened to the Honourable Leader of the Opposition, I heard him lament about being the busiest man. And while, again, I am a man who is inclined to be sympathetic for most things, it is difficult to feel such sympathy when a man has, or the Honourable Member in this particular instance, has done all in his power to be in the position that he now holds, and laments the responsibility that comes with it. Madam Deputy Speaker, this bill has been on our website. It's been laid since November. There is nothing in this bill that was snuck in the dead of night that would have been unavailable to the Honourable Leader of the Opposition. Yet, after about 3 hours plus, I would want to say rant, but that might be inappropriate. But 3 hours of conversation, there has only been about 3 references to the bill. And I feel, Madam Deputy Speaker, that we have to talk to the public of Barbados, because we come here to do serious things. And regardless of whatever is on this floor, week after week, we have to subject ourselves to the same conversation by the Honourable Leader of the Opposition, who refuses to engage with the material that is before the House. Madam Deputy Speaker, even during the course of this debate, and no one rose at any point in time to remind of the rules, but the idea of repeating oneself consistently, ad nauseum, ad infinitum, however. It is in the rules of this House. We did not stop him, sir, but there were about 4 or 5 different, ma'am, but there were about 4 or 5 different occasions where the point wasn't made and was returned again to be not made again. And no one got on their feet, sir, Madam Deputy Speaker, to start the Honourable Leader of the Opposition. In fact, Madam Deputy Speaker, I listened quite attentively as we were entertained for the 3 hours. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, let us talk about some of these things. And I wish, I was joking to myself that I would respond to some of the things that were said by the Honourable Leader of the Opposition, and I found that my notes were all over the place. And it occurred to me that the reason my notes are all over the place is because I actually followed the Leader of the Opposition, who was all over the place. If we were in another place, I would say I was reminded of Punka. This is an important discussion, Madam Deputy Speaker. It is the most important conversation that we are having today. The clause 10, and there were only 5 occasions. In the clause on clause 10 that the Honourable Leader spoke so passionately about, in the smaller piece of legislation as he referred to it, I had the opportunity, Madam Deputy Speaker, to be Minister responsible for fisheries. It is a ministry that to this day lives in my heart. There is no joke for me when it comes to fishing. fisheries, the lives of the fish vendors, the fishermen. And for the Honourable Leader of the Opposition to try to malign a whole government with the fantasies that exist only in his mind, is perhaps, Madam Deputy Speaker, one of the instances where we see an injustice being dealt on the people unnecessarily for political gain. When I was Minister responsible for fisheries, Madam Deputy Speaker, I spent considerable time in the markets. I developed a relationship with the fishermen. I know them by name. I know their children, sir, ma'am. The Honourable Member who now holds the portfolio, spending significant time in the markets, on the boats, developing a relationship, Madam Deputy Speaker, with the vendors as well, because we recognize that this is serious work. But while I was Minister responsible for fisheries, and I'm not going to get into whether we should take up Clause 10 and not take up Clause 10 and how Clause 10 means that we are casting judgment. We all know that this government is not casting judgment on anybody. But when I was Minister responsible for fisheries, I cannot tell you the number of occasions that the fisher folk would reach out to my office and ask me to come to the market, concerned for their own safety because of incidents in the market. The frequency with which, Madam Deputy Speaker, any right-thinking person would have to be concerned. And I am saying that, Madam Deputy Speaker, as a person who loves the market and who loves the vendors and the fishermen in the market. But the reality is that the fish vendors, as the Minister responsible said, felt that in this particular instance, without a judgment on themselves or without a judgment on anybody else in Barbados, that we should continue with that particular clause. Now, if it is that we care so much about their opinion when it suits us, how do we not care about their opinion when it defeats the weakness and exposes the weakness of the argument that was put forward to take it out? We can't have respect for their opinion when it suits us and no respect for their opinion when it does not suit us. I do not know the sign that the Honourable Member for Christchurch East did in sign language, but it holds true. At the end of the day, Madam Deputy Speaker, this bill is a serious, comprehensive piece of legislation. Last week or week before, when we debated the Environmental Health Bill, the Honourable Leader of the Opposition asked then that we bring comprehensive pieces of legislation to address all the issues pertaining to a particular sector in one, which is what this bill does. Again, therefore, when it is suitable for him, for the Honourable Member, it is acceptable. But when it is not suitable for the Honourable Member, it is unacceptable. Of course, we all also recognize that we were then subjected to the idea that because it was presented, it was accepted by all in this place because it was presented, and that we should sit in silence and let it be said. But when there is opposition, when we get up and repeat or we challenge it, that's also a problem. So do you want us to sit and accept or get up and challenge? I said a few weeks ago that it is difficult to have a stable conversation with a man who is at war with himself. Hey, the issues in George Street are his, the Honourable Member for Christchurch South. Madam Deputy Speaker, let us get into some of the points that were raised. So that is Clause 10. And we recognize, Madam Deputy Speaker, that the vendors were asking for it because they're concerned about their business. This is about their livelihood and their work. It disturbs their business. Every time there is an incident in the market, somebody refuses to go for a day, 2 days, or a week. It is about their livelihood, Madam Deputy Speaker. Clause 269 that was referred to in relation to gender. Imagine the clause was mentioned, Clause 269, and absolutely nothing was said about the clause. So we raised the clause in a debate on fisheries to then try to educate persons about gender relations, when this government has done more to make sure that there is a gender balance in this country than any other government. But absolutely no reference whatsoever to the clause. Clause 269, let me find it for you. And then nothing. Absolutely nothing. That's the second time it was mentioned. The third time that the reference was made to the bill was in relation to insurance. And that whether the government needs to put something to do with insurance into the bill. And again, this bill, Madam Deputy Speaker, was on our website since November, laid in Parliament since November. So there is no excuse for saying you didn't have a chance to read the bill. So I would wish to direct the Honourable Leader of the Opposition to Clause 67 that speaks to registration of Barbados fishing vessels. And permit me to read it, Madam Deputy Speaker. Clause 67(1). No person shall operate a fishing vessel or other seagoing craft used for fishing or related activities in Barbados waters unless the fishing vessel or seagoing craft A is registered and the owner is in possession of a valid certificate of registration of a Barbados fishing vessel issued in respect of that vessel or other seagoing craft as prescribed under this Act. And in B, that vessel has insurance coverage or cover in an equivalent form of financial security against risk of loss or damage to third parties. And it goes on. Madam Deputy Speaker. The bill also speaks to insurance, compulsory third-party insurance at 398. It would be of benefit to the Leader of the Opposition to at least engage with what is before the Parliament. Read the bill. Clause 398, no fishing vessel shall be used as part of a fish tourism venture except that vessel has third-party liability insurance or other equivalent form of financial security. Madam Deputy Speaker, this is about the fourth or fifth time that we have come to Parliament to be schooled by someone who needs to be the student. It is clear to me that if the opposition leader would take some time to read the bills, half of what he proposed as solutions, he would recognize were already in the bill. We were discussing disabilities. Oh, you need to set up a fund. There was a whole section on having a fund. And this is the level to which the debate has now fallen, Madam Deputy Speaker. The other incident that was referred to was in part 5 that spoke to supply of data and information. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, I keep saying that we are debating someone who is at war with himself. On the one hand, we are scolded for not modernizing the industry. When we modernize I heard, you need to have modern legislation, but modern legislation is actually what is before the House. You all need to have modern legislation, but praise us for the modern legislation. You all need to do infrastructure, you need modern infrastructure, but praise us for the infrastructure that we did. It seems to me that the opposition leader has a problem for every solution. A cloud for every silver lining. It is clear to me that if you were to look at what is before us, Madam Deputy Speaker, and we say have to have data, what is wrong with that? This is what I found offensive about his contribution, however, because he would have us believe that the persons who drafted the legislation, and let me say to you, Madam Deputy Speaker, that this bill was drafted after much consultation. So when you insult the persons who drafted the legislation, trying to cast aspersions on the CPC's office, you are casting aspersions on all the technocrats in the ministry, you are casting aspersions on all the fishermen and the vendors who participated, the international community, the local stakeholders, Madam Deputy Speaker, all who had something to say about this bill. But when he says it means that we do not understand fisheries, it means he does not understand fisheries.
The Honourable Member, please.
The Honourable Member for Christchurch South. The Honourable Member for Christchurch South, Madam Deputy Speaker, obviously is not aware that the most intelligent people that I ever had the opportunity to interact with are persons who work in the market. So when it is said that a fish vendor who is selling fish does not have time to record what is said and what sales they made, he obviously has never spoken to a fish vendor. Spend some time in Christchurch South, from whence you came, or wherever it is that you attempt now to go. If you ask a fish vendor at the end of the day, what did you sell today? There is no fish vendor who cannot tell you every single piece of fish that they sold, the poundage in which they sold, the time at which they sold it, and so on and so on. I was in awe of the capacity, Madam Deputy Speaker, the capacity to recall at the end of the day, at the end of a week. And I would also tell you, Madam Deputy Speaker, while the opposition leader may think this is outside the capacity of many of them already do it. Keep records. So when it is that you want to suggest that we are stereotyping fish vendors, it is the opposition leader who, by virtue of what he contributed today, is the person who is stereotyping the fish vendors. Madam Deputy Speaker, the last occasion, or is that all five, on which the opposition leader spoke, Madam Deputy Speaker, we found ourselves then having a conversation about milk. Milk. I was wondering if he was talking about fish milk. Fish milk. Because we now have to spend 3 hours. There is a view that you have to talk for 3 hours. And in that 3 hours now, you must spend your time upward and downward and cross there and about here. The opposition leader must speak for 3 hours every time we bring a bill. And during the course of the contribution, repeat, cast aspersions, say these ludicrous statements. Madam Deputy Speaker, on a bill on fisheries, we end up talking about milk. I beg the question again, whether we were talking about fish milk. The truth of the matter is, Madam Deputy Speaker, and if the Honourable Minister of Agriculture, I'm sure he has addressed it before, and the persons who are involved, and then to blame the government, as if the government has been the cause or the reason that many places in the world were having difficulty accessing milk. And I would not get into that. But Madam Deputy Speaker, before I get into some of the other things, because I will not be distracted, this is a government that remains focused. When we came into office, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I got the opportunity to be minister responsible for maritime affairs and the blue economy, it was clear to me during the initial conversation by the Honourable Prime Minister, and the other thing is this, that every time a member in this floor says something about the Prime Minister, the opposition leader wants us to behave as if the Prime Minister is something to be scorned. A Prime Minister that has brought glory to this country. A Prime Minister that has led this country with distinction and has allowed us to bring Barbados back from the depth to which the party that the leader for the opposition inveigled himself and made sure he had the opportunity to lead. It is this Prime Minister, sir, and the way she led the government. I must tell you, Madam Deputy Speaker, I am very proud of the Prime Minister of Barbados. And if I am to be ashamed of her, it would not be because of the hallucinations or the delusions of the leader of the opposition. But Madam Deputy Speaker, in the first conversation that I had, because I'm a social scientist, as everyone knows by now, I said to the Prime Minister when I was offered maritime affairs and blue economy, this is a true story. But I expected, to be truthful, to be in the ministry that I now hold. And I was grateful for the opportunity to lead maritime affairs and blue economy. And the Prime Minister, in her wisdom, said to me, Kirk, at that time she was not calling me minister, you will come to find that the social issues are the issues that you must resolve in the blue economy space, Madam Deputy Speaker. And we have brought legislations, Madam Deputy Speaker, to be able to do just that. But I go further. When I became minister responsible, Madam Deputy Speaker, I found a poem by Frank Collymore that I thought was perhaps one of the most moving pieces. And I would read the first stanza. And it simply says, it's called Hymn to the Sea. Like all who live on small islands, I must always be remembering the sea. Like all who live on small islands, I must always be remembering the sea. It means that we have to care about the people who work in it. We have to care about the fish who swim in it, the coral that survive in it, the entire biodiversity that exists there, Madam Deputy Speaker. And it is shameful when we come here week after week for political points. And the funny thing is, I also listened to the opposition leader as he spoke about the need for us to do a haul out at Oistins. Well, I was there. We had a meeting. I reminded the opposition leader previously in this place. We had a meeting. The person who came in at the time with the solution that he had proposed at Oistins at the time, when he saw the movement of the boats at Oistins, Oistins only look easy, but that water is not easy. Anyone who deals with Oistins would tell you. And at the time, what was said was that the solution was not suitable for Barbados, the one that he just spoke about, the Honourable Leader of the Opposition. The solution that is now being bandied about in this place was not suitable for Barbados. I am happy to see the Honourable Leader, the Honourable Minister responsible for fisheries now having a solution, one that makes sense for the people of Oistins, and the people of Oistins can expect relief very soon. I also find it amusing. You know, self-adulation is a thing. I also find it amusing. If we were on the day before the hurricane, let me be real. If I were on the day before the hurricane when I was minister, or if the Honourable Member for Christchurch, West Central, in his capacity as minister, and let me say to you, Honourable Member, you are doing an excellent job. An excellent job. But if we had said the day before the hurricane, I had called Barnufo, or I had called any of the fishing organs and say, haul all the boats out and put them on the pasture in Deacons, no. If I had said, haul out all the boats out of the safe space that Barbados has had for years, for decades, and put them all on the pasture in Deacons, as everyone would say I am a madman. It is the ramblings of a madman. We should take all the boats and put them on Oistins the day on Deacon's pasture the day before a hurricane. Well, nobody would take us seriously. But it's easy to look back and to see that after something that has served this country for 30 years is violated by a hurricane that had unexpected strength, it's easy to come and say, oh, you should have put them there. I know the boats are being repaired because, you know, the government ain't doing that for the boats, but the same location on which the boats are being repaired, so clearly you saw the boats being repaired, this government is busy repairing the vessels. Now also, I am to be praised for that. It is, to me, Madam Deputy Speaker, a difficult thing, you know, to come to Parliament, to prepare yourself to engage in intellectual discussion or discourse on these matters. And no matter how low you set your expectations, there is a way some persons find to go even lower. We went, Madam Deputy Speaker, to Oistins. The jetty at Oistins needed repair. I remember in the first conversation, when we said we were going to fix the jetty at Oistins, there was a fisherman who, I won't call his name, but he said to me, Minister, you are new. There are many people who said they're going to fix that jetty and they never did anything for the jetty in Oistins, but the jetty in Oistins was fixed. When we said we were going to repair the market and to make sure that the metal, the properties on top of the counters met phytosanitary standard, they said, some of them, Madam Deputy Speaker, that, you know, government always says they're going to take care of the fisher folk and they never do. But we did that too. Even as much as complaining about the sun, and because, Madam Deputy Speaker, I spent, as does know the Honourable Member for Christchurch West Central, considerable time in the market. So at a certain time in Oistins, the sun would affect the vendors and we extended the covering of the market. We did the same thing, Madam Deputy Speaker. We repaired the stall, the vending space for the vendors at Oistins. There has been so much work done at Oistins. Well, if I were to go in front of anybody who would have done so much work on my behalf, in the presence of my mother or my father or anybody who cares about me and complain, they would call me an ungrateful child. It is the behavior of an ungrateful child. If it is that we've done all of these things at Oistins, to find ourselves subjected to these things, and Madam Deputy Speaker, while I do not get personally offended by any of these things, let me say that I put my heart and my soul into that job. And so when we did Tent Bay, I was proud of the work we did at Tent Bay. When we did Oistins, I was proud of the work we did in Oistins. When we did Bridgetown, I was proud of the work we did in Bridgetown. When we did Pile Bay, I was proud of the work we did at Pile Bay. When we did Paynes Bay, I was proud of the work we did at Paynes Bay. And when we did St. Peter, I was proud of the work we did in Spicetown. All of the markets, Madam Deputy Speaker, and then we were turning our attention to the landing sites. And I know the Honourable Minister responsible for fisheries is now looking at the landing sites. So I do not come here, Madam Deputy Speaker, with my tail behind my legs. This idea about I ain't frightened for nobody and Madam Deputy Speaker, there is a way we comport and conduct ourselves in this place. And this idea about who I'm fighting and I ain't fighting and, some of us have to be the adult in the room. It is clear to me, Madam Deputy Speaker, that this government has a record in fisheries that is second to none. In relation to the incident that occurred with Barrel, Madam Deputy Speaker, none of us could have seen it, but I doubt very much there has been a single government that responded the way that this government responded to dealing with the issues that came up as a result of the hurricane. I doubt it. I doubt that you can find a single case where a government responded the way that this government has responded to the issues that came up, Madam Deputy Speaker. And Madam Deputy Speaker, we spent a lot of time, there are serious conversations that must be had in fisheries. The Honourable Minister spoke about the Marine Spatial Plan. We also, Madam Deputy Speaker, as part of that Marine Spatial Plan, we must look at the marine protected areas. I have a colleague from one of the other islands, I won't call the island, but he spoke of his experience when he bought a marine protected area. And a marine protected area essentially is a space where you either reduce or you prevent certain activities in that space. It may include fishing. And when you do that, Madam Deputy Speaker, over a year or two, certainly within a 5-year span, the fish, because the fish have a propensity to replenish themselves. The abundance of fish that you get in those areas, Madam Deputy Speaker, it is a case of being able to hold back today so you could get something tomorrow. And that is all that we are saying. Madam Deputy Speaker, when we look at the Marine Spatial Plan and the Marine Protected Areas, Madam Deputy Speaker, we outlined, and as part of our plan, Madam Deputy Speaker, in line with the SDGs, particularly SDG 13 and 14, which I concern myself with a lot, and SDG 11, which is in relation to sustainable action in communities. We made sure that we were doing the right things in this government. Madam Deputy Speaker, none of us could have predicted what happened with Barrel, but the government responded well. The funny thing is, again, whenever we say the word resilience in here, oh, you're all in love with the word resilience. Everything about this government is resilience. But when you ask us to build a safe harbor, either at Bridgetown or somewhere else, what do you think that is? I am telling you, there is a certain misunderstanding. I would have to call it a misunderstanding because I would never be one to accuse the Honourable Leader of the Opposition of deliberately misrepresenting the facts. And even though it has become clear to me that no matter how many facts we put on the table, the Honourable Leader would make sure that his opinion is never contaminated by truth or facts, regardless of the amount of facts that we put on the table. But at the end of the day, Madam Deputy Speaker, when we build out a safe harbor, what do you think that is? That is resilience. When we say to the fish vendors, let us understand how much fish you catch in a day so that in the event that you suffer a loss, we can compensate you for the loss, that is also resilience. When we put in place the things that we put in place to compensate, to give financial support, to give support for rebuilding the boats, that is also about resilience. It is the word that offends the Leader of the Opposition, but clearly not the practice. At the end of the day, Madam Deputy Speaker, we were elected by the people of Barbados to lead this country. The last thing that I will speak about, Madam Deputy Speaker, because the leader of the opposition spoke about welfare. And while this is a debate on fisheries, he tried to make a link between welfare and fish vendors and so on. And he said that there was a lady with 6 children who was only receiving $600 plus from the welfare department. Madam Deputy Speaker, I would have it be known that the government in the last 2 years has put the most money ever in the history of this country behind the welfare department, ever in the history of this country. The same could be said about fisheries. When you put 100 million in the blue economy, never has there been a government putting that kind of money in that space either. But we put, Madam Deputy Speaker, a significant amount of resources at the welfare department. And we found, Madam Deputy Speaker, there are 2 things occurring in this country. We have, not only at welfare department, we also had monies put through on family, which is separate and distinct. Another project, Madam Deputy Speaker, when we added up, that adds. We had the Adopt a Family program, which also contributed to the well-being of people in this country. When you look at the combined pot of resources, there has never been a government that has done so much, Madam Deputy Speaker, for the vulnerable poor in this country. Never, ever before in the history of this country. But I would never say that more cannot be done. But it is our view that to build out a country, we need to offer training programs, which we are doing and have done. I just spent over lunch a conversation with the Honourable Member for St. James South, talking about some of those same training programs and how it is that we're going to take some of those hundreds, if not thousands, actually thousands of young persons and give them access to opportunity so that we break in a comprehensive way the cycle of poverty. This idea that for us to break the cycle of poverty, the only way to do it is to offer increased welfare is misleading. It is a combined, comprehensive response, Madam Deputy Speaker, of social policy, social development frameworks that would allow us to get our way out of this. And that is what this government is doing, Madam Deputy Speaker. So I am satisfied, Madam Deputy Speaker, that the bill that is before this chamber is appropriate for the times in which we live. I am satisfied, Madam Deputy Speaker, that what the government came to office to do is exactly what the government is doing in relation to improving the lives of persons who are involved in the fishing industry. I have seen plans, Madam Deputy Speaker, when they roll out, that will be so beneficial. You know, it is funny because I'm telling you that I think sometimes it is a case of misunderstanding or perhaps a case of not being able to accurately recall events that allows the opposition leader to conclude the things that he concludes. Because it is clear to me that all of us in this government knew full well that we were always concerned about the size of the space that we had at Bridgetown. We did not have to wait for the opposition leader to say Bridgetown was too compact. In fact, these are conversations we were having from the time we came into office. We had drawings, Madam Deputy Speaker, we looked at the costs and we looked at ways to being able to comprehensively build out. And I suspect in the next few years, under the leadership of the Honourable Member for Christchurch West Central and the Honourable Prime Minister, that we will be able to build out that space, Madam Deputy Speaker, because it was the government's policy, not because it was something that was granted, that was suggested, Madam Deputy Speaker, by the Leader of the Opposition after a hurricane last year. Look at what we said. These things, a lot of these things are in the manifesto that was signed on by the Honourable Leader of the Opposition. So these are not secrets. We did not come to office and implement a whole brand of secrets. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, I close by saying this. And I say it first and foremost, well, not foremost, but first, to the Honourable Member responsible for fisheries. You are doing a good job. I am satisfied, and the country is satisfied, that you have put your heart and your soul into helping. Now, obviously, after you've lost everything, it is difficult for people. The Honourable Member for the Leader of the Opposition has said the people are not happy. The fishermen are not happy. But there are some who have said to me that they are satisfied. Obviously, everybody would like more to be done. I wish that we could do more. I wish that the government could do more. But fishermen are practical men, men of practical enterprise. Many of them have said, I wish more could be done, but we thank the government for what they have done. I actually saw a documentary on TV that said so. The fishermen themselves were saying so. So to come here and give the impression that nothing was done is misleading. So I want to tell the honourable member you are doing a good job. I want to say to the fisher folk that this government will stay by them. We remain committed to them, that their issues are our issues. The things that concern them concern us. I heard the leader of the opposition once say he has not come to politics to comfort the disturbed. Look at Hansard. We came to politics to comfort the disturbed. And if it disturbs the fisher folk, we will find a way to comfort them. I want to say to the staff who work in this space that it is not easy to come and to see that the work that you would have done is being pilloried in a way that was pilloried today for political purposes, but you are also doing a great job. Madam Deputy Speaker, I want to thank the persons who work in fisheries because they do not get enough thanks. So we will continue, Madam Deputy Speaker, to do what we were called upon to do, to serve the people of this country. This bill, these two bills that are before the House, Madam Deputy Speaker, will go a long way to doing that, and I support these bills, Madam Deputy Speaker, wholeheartedly. Thank you.
Honourable Member for St. Lucie.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I rise to support this bill today, a bill which seeks to protect and assist the ordinary, what we may term as the ordinary person in this country, but very, very important people in this country. Madam Deputy Speaker, I want to say out front that so important was this sector to this country that one of the first things this party did, and the Honourable Prime Minister was instrumental in doing, is to ensure that there was a Ministry of Maritime Affairs which was led, and ably so, by the Honourable Member for St. Michael South, who just spoke before me. But I am somewhat concerned as I've come to this chamber week after week after week. Amidst the tremendous work that is being done by this administration, facing the various issues in this economy, Madam Deputy Speaker, and fixing them, putting things in place to correct the wrongs or to improve the lot of persons in this country. I am somewhat concerned that if you did not follow debates in this House, and if you did not follow what the government has been doing, when you listen to the leader of the opposition, you will feel that this is a government that is all over the place and that does not know what it's doing and that does not have the interest of the ordinary person at heart. I am reminded, Madam Deputy Speaker, when I come here so often, of a very popular comedy show on television which used to be shown a few years ago. It is called The Jeffersons. And when I look and I see the expression and the mannerisms and the conduct of the Honourable Member for Christchurch South, I would feel that the scouts of there's some scouts coming in from Hollywood trying to look for actors to fulfill the role of George Jefferson. And the honorable member for Christchurch South would fit that role quite well. I cannot understand, having been voted, elected to represent a constituency on a particular party ticket, because people believed in the policies that this party put forward, and determined that they, in that particular constituency, would support the Barbados Labour Party and who the person represent. That person at that point in time was the honorable member for Christchurch South, who now is the leader of the opposition. And I believe that persons are disappointed at the sad state of affairs today and are longing for the time to come when they will correct what they did back then because of what has happened over the last year or so from this side. And that you, rather than represent the people who voted for you on a particular party ticket, and I see demonstrated ever since then, there seems to be, even up to today, there seems to be this policy or practice by the honorable member that it is either his way or the highway. Every single policy this government or position this government has taken and has brought to this honorable chamber to help the ordinary persons out there, it is vilified. Honorable members on this side are cursed. This party, this government is cursed by the honorable member as though it is not doing anything for the people. I recall, Madam Deputy Speaker, that, and I do not intend to praise or propagate the happenings within the opposition, but it is clear for all to see. And I'm not going to fail to mention and talk about certain things, Madam Deputy Speaker, because the public of Barbados must know the truth. They must know exactly what's happening. They must not be allowed that the honorable member would come here and say all these things about these bad things about this administration, and no one stands to defend the administration. My colleagues on the front bench have been ably doing so. But there comes a time when the back bench must be heard as well. Because we are a team. And as I was saying that, we see demonstrated every week, and the ears of persons must be sore now, hearing the same thing, seeing the same thing every single week. And you would not believe that this government has been doing tremendous work to advance the causes of the people of Barbados, the cause of the ordinary person in this country. In this case, today we are dealing with the fishermen. who have been great contributors to this economy. You would not believe, if you listen to this speech today and you've listened to other speeches before, that the same honourable member for Christchurch South is the one who was bitterly against the $5 million that was spent for the vendors at Oystens. You would not believe that, and all of a sudden, Madam Deputy Speaker, he seems to be John the Baptist, or want us to believe he's John the Baptist coming to rescue. And speaking on the behalf of the honourable person, when he opposed, and this, the honourable member opposed what this government was doing earlier on the advent of World Cup, when we spent $5 million fixing stalls and painting the stalls and so on, giving the ordinary person, the vendors at Oystens, whom he's supposed to be representing, the honourable member is supposed to be representing, when we spent $5 million fixing up their places of business and making them presentable as possible prior to World Cup, the World Cup when it came here, Madam Deputy Speaker. And having done that, Madam Deputy Speaker, we proceeded to do other projects. And right now, I'm sure the rest of Barbados will soon see a rollout, because we brought vending legislation, and we will soon see vending zones all across this country. We are working on the behalf of the people, Madam Deputy Speaker. So anytime the honourable member for Christchurch South comes to this Parliament, to make it look as though this administration is not doing anything on the behalf of the people of this country, it seems to be a case that it is like damned if you do, damned if you don't. We work and we do projects on the behalf of the small man, so to speak, and the opposition curse us for doing so. And they want to give the impression, as they have propagated for quite some time, that we are a government of the big person, but we are doing things, Madam Deputy Speaker, for the man at the lower echelons of the ladder, the lower rungs of the ladder. That is what this administration has been doing, so that these people can look forward in the future to the continued work of this administration. But I believe, Madam Deputy Speaker, that the honourable member came here today quite in a bind and quite uncomfortable. Because when you look in today's nation, when you read in today's nation what the honourable member in his capacity of leader of the other party has presided over ever since he went to that, he left this side of the house. I recall few months back then, one member whom he subsequently had expelled said from the time he came to this side, it has been trouble. Trouble. And if the honourable member is going to come here and attack this government for the wonderful things that they have been doing for the people of Barbados, then he owes the people of Barbados an explanation. You need to talk to the people of Barbados. Mind your own business. Stop minding the business of this government. Mind your business and tell the people of Barbados what is happening. People are wondering. Tell them we're going at George Street. Stop minding Robert Street or Bay Street. And when you look, and if you were to see, Madam Deputy Speaker, what is happening, you pay attention to it. It appears that everywhere, true to what one of the members of that team at that point in time has said, every time you look, one day, one week after week after week, there's problems. You have now a situation where the person who did, and I'm not here to promote anybody, but you got to talk the truth. And you have to call it as you see it. The person from that side then, who did better, I believe he would have done better than the honourable member for Christchurch South if he has remained on that side. Now there seems to be a problem there as well. And he needs to tell the people of Barbados, because if you are purporting to be the next leader of this country and you are trying to make person, because people are watching, and they want to know, if you cannot leave a party of a few hundred persons, how can you lead a country of almost 300,000? And every time Yes, I thought does not put an idea, does not put any proposal, nothing on the table except to strip and try to pull down. But the time will come soon. The time will come soon. The people of Barbados will expose you for who you are. And certainly, we on this side will expose and share with the people of Barbados all those things which have been done outside of their interests. The fishermen, the vendors, boat owners are indeed happy because this government, when they had to deal the aftermath of the hurricane, this administration has assisted and is still assisting. It's still assisting. And I want to thank the government. I want to say to the Honourable Minister, member for Christchurch West Central, the markets have been fixed and you turn into the fish landing sites. I want you to remember the landing site at Half Moon Fort. I had spoken to the Honourable member for St. Michael's South when he was minister, and you want you to turn your attention to that. You can pass 6 months and just there in Half Moon Fort where the fish landing site is. Pay some attention to that and assist the vendors who are there and the persons who use that fish landing site ever so often. As required. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, I want to support this bill wholeheartedly. This government is putting its money where its mouth is. It is not just talking, it is putting things in place to help the ordinary person. And I want to say this evening that I support this bill 1000%. And whether I want to say to the Honourable Member for Christchurch South, no matter where you may run, if you want to run from where you are and run to St. John, St. Lucie, they got some rat bait up there. And St. John, like other places in Barbados, I know, and that is where perhaps the Honourable Member is in a pickle. They're all rat proof. I thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, for allowing me just to add my 2 cents worth to this debate. I commend the Minister highly, and I support this bill unreservedly. I thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker.
Our member for St. James Central.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I thank you for the opportunity to offer a few words in this debate. And I want to begin by apologizing to you, ma'am, because during the course of the day, I was compelled to use these premises as a place from which I had to participate in some meetings touching and concerning other areas of the productive sector. But it would have been impossible for me to be here today and not participate in this debate, a debate in which, ma'am, I want to place on the record immediately my own view as a minister, defined as senior minister with a responsibility for the productive sector, to say to this country through this place, ma'am, and through you, that I see this sector as being an emerging part of the nation's productive sector. Now let me start by saying, ma'am, we are legislating here an overhaul of, I think it is the 1993 Fisheries Act. And in so doing, ma'am, we are fundamentally transforming a sector which has historically only contributed around 1% of GDP, and transforming it, ma'am, to a place where it can achieve its fullest potential. Now, why do I start there, ma'am? I start there because I am cognizant, and this government by extension is cognizant of the fact, and more particularly the minister who so eruditely piloted this bill today has championed the fact that the marine space in Barbados is 425 times the size of our terrestrial space. But otherwise, simply put, we got 425 times more water around this island than we have on the island itself. So it stands to reason, therefore, that the maritime space is literally pregnant with potential. And I don't have to go into all of the other things that the maritime space can do, because we live here and we see it. We see people using it for recreational purposes in tourism. We see people, ma'am, using it for the purposes of shipping. We see, ma'am, that there are other places in the world, and we too have the potential to explore at some point the gas that lies subterranean to the maritime space. In other words, under the ground. We see, ma'am, the opportunities which are evolving in technology for energy, renewable energy, and we know that we can put windmills in the sea and therefore, ma'am, generate electricity offshore in such a way as to make light and access to electricity more cost effective for Barbadians. But what we have to do, ma'am, is to begin where it is the most easy. And this country has to come face to face, in my judgment, with the fact that we have a sector of people who historically, and I make no apology for saying it, let me say, ma'am, that in this debate, I will say clearly and unequivocally, I am speaking as part of a Labour Party, but I, ma'am, stand in the Labour Party on the left wing, on the Labour side of the Labour Party. And so therefore, ma'am, when I speak to this matter, I speak with a certain degree of passion because, ma'am, we have been content to treat the people who go to sea every blessed day of their life. Get up in the dark before 4 in the morning, go 3, 4, 13, 30 miles off Barbados, ma'am, risking life and limb, day and night at sea, sometimes 3, 5 days in a week away from their home and their family. They bring back, ma'am, that substance which provides food safety for this country. That substance, ma'am, which provides, that product which provides nutritional security for this country. Ma'am, it costs the country no foreign exchange. This is what they contribute to ensuring that there is value for every family in Barbados which is interested in its personal health and well-being. By extension, ma'am, they have contributed to the cultural development of Barbados. And by extension, ma'am, let us not forget that in every stage, from the time the fish is caught and put on that boat, there is a step after step after step that contributes to employment, contributes to value added along a commercial line, a commercial chain. Madam Deputy Speaker, in spite of all of that, the sector and the people who work in that sector are treated as though they are at the bottom of the economic structure in Barbados. Now that can't, in my judgment, be good enough. And I feel today the same way I felt when I had the opportunity in the previous life of this administration to pilot the vendor's bill. And the two are very linked because they're about emancipating working class people from shackles, psychological shackles, ma'am, that have restrained their opportunity for upward social mobility in Barbados. I feel even more passionate about the fact that now we are passing pieces of legislation, a cognate debate, but the two are so inextricably linked, ma'am. The two pieces are so inextricably linked that we treat them as one. We are passing pieces of legislation that will now empower those who were treated as being at the bottom of the economic structure of this country and elevating them, ma'am, to earners of foreign exchange in Barbados, standing as they rightfully should have stood for years alongside all of the other major arteries of commerce in this country. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, having said that, it is important to recognize, ma'am, that there were historically some inadequacies which confronted this sector and which any government that was right-minded and right-thinking needed to fix. And this is not the first time I'm saying that on the floor of this place. You know, the Prime Minister likes to tease me sometimes by telling me that every time we have a political meeting at Oistins, before I get to the podium, she knows what my speech is going to be. Because many a time there and in here, ma'am, I have spoken to the fact that there is a concept known as sanitary and phytosanitary measures, a lovely way of saying that you have to have consideration for food safety. And that therefore, ma'am, if you can take the idea and the ideal of food safety and bring it to bear on international and national commerce, national business, that you can, ma'am, unleash opportunities for people engaged in the food sector. But this is part of what this is about. And one of the things that this government must remind Barbadians about, not the least of whom will be the leader of the opposition, is that a few months ago, the Minister of Agriculture came here and passed a piece of legislation which was a humbug to Barbados for all of its existence as an independent state. The fact, ma'am, that we had cows about here that producing milk, but we could not take any milk-based product and export it over into the wider world because we did not satisfy the requirements for sanitary and phytosanitary measures in trade. We had chickens run about in every yard, Madam Deputy Speaker, but we could not take any protein and sell it anywhere in the world because we could not satisfy the sanitary and phytosanitary measures. And in every coastal community, Madam Deputy Speaker, we had fishermen who catching fish day and night, but we could not take that which they caught and sell to the rest of the world because we did not satisfy sanitary and phytosanitary measures. And we were content in not doing that because we were a country that laid back in complacency, mercantilist complacency. The merchants in Bridgetown will bring in everything and we will spend all of our foreign exchange, and the merchants in Bridgetown will live in the lap of luxury, Mr. Speaker, sir, Madam Deputy Speaker, ma'am. And those people who toiled, whether it be in the agricultural field, as I say, raising the chickens and feeding the cows, or in the fishing industry, they were treated as second-class citizens economically. Can't work, ma'am. This piece of legislation now is to be married with the sanitary and phytosanitary legislation which is already passed. And once you understand that marriage, ma'am, you understand now that there is a whole wave of opportunity that has been unleashed. And so when I go back to Oystins to speak, I don't have to give the same speech about wishing and hoping and wanting and expressing a vision for there to be export potential. I can now speak to the export potential that will exist from this moment forward. And that is why, ma'am, we took the pains of fixing all the fish markets. I heard several speakers today refer to them. Let us not see that as standing in splendid isolation. It is part of a development plan, a development trajectory, that you wanted to have those steel basins, those wash-down basins, ma'am, because if you put fish on this piece of wood here, the blood will go into the grain. In an open-air fish market, ma'am, you're going to have the flies coming on top of the wood grain that is bloodied. And those people who study the sanitary and phytosanitary measures will say, that ain't good enough. Change of temperature in some markets, ma'am. The boat comes in and the fish is on the ice, but it goes in the hot sun and the fish moves from the ice to room temperature and then even warmer than room temperature. And then, ma'am, you cut it up and so on and you put it there for sale. And the people will say the temperature has not been consistent and therefore there may be a challenge to the quality of that which you are eating. All of these are issues, ma'am, about which we failed to educate the wider society, and government after government in this place since independence must now stand condemned for having chosen to remain silent with their tongues collectively cleaved to the roofs of their mouths And for the first time in the history of Barbados today, we have come to a point, ma'am, where this fishing sector, this fishing industry, is now being given an opportunity to enter into the full light of day. I am proud to be part of a government today which is doing this type of work. We are also, ma'am, repairing, therefore, some inadequacies in the regulatory framework that touched and concerned fishing. And ma'am, these things are wide. They touch a number of issues. And I want, ma'am, to say to you that, you know, the work that we're doing here today, we're not alone. St. Vincent, to be honest with you, did some of this a while ago in terms of the refurbishment of their fish markets. In fact, the first time I saw the steel basins and the tables and the washdown basins and so on, Prime Minister Gonzalez took me on a tour of a fish market and showed me this thing. And I said, but why is it that we had not been doing this in Barbados? And the reason, ma'am, that I go there all the time is this, that in 2007, the European Union had a team of people here in Barbados who did an assessment of our capacity. And they said to us then, we'll be going into a partnership, economic partnership with Europe. And Europe will purchase the fish as much as we can produce. But we had to be able to meet certain basic requirements. And ma'am, we are at this point in 2025 where we should have been in 2008. So the first thing that this government has to take some credit for, I believe, ma'am, is the fact that, you know, there was a lost decade in between there. And then we would have been able to do far more, far faster, I believe, had it not been for COVID. But even during COVID, you have heard the litany of comments today about all the markets that have been repaired even during COVID. In Paynes Bay, my constituency, ma'am, it was done during COVID. And a spokesperson for the Democratic Labour Party cursed this government in Paynes Bay, said that the work is creating too much dust, and so it shouldn't be being done. That was the level of ignorance. That's the level of ignorance that passes, ma'am, for an understanding of governance in Barbados. And we heard some of it today from the lips of he who leads the opposition. And ma'am, while I mention him, because he who misleads, and I ma'am, must tell you, you know, I listened to him talk about the fact that, let me not talk about him. Let me say, ma'am, that there are a number of other countries in this region that are struggling to get where we have gotten today. Ma'am, I want to tell you for a fact that the Fisheries Management Bill in Trinidad and Tobago was tabled in that House of Assembly in the year 2020. You hear what I tell you? In 2020, 5 years ago, ma'am, and it still has not been able to pass the Parliament of Trinidad and Tobago. It here today, and will pass this place today. The Fisheries Amendment Act in 2023 in St. Lucia, ma'am, still not to the quality of where we are today. Belize has a piece of legislation that was passed in 2020, falls short. And the minister who did such an excellent job in piloting this bill referred to the international sentiment about it. Now, I know for a fact that he ain't telling lies, because, ma'am, it was through me that he got to the international community. It is through me, ma'am, that certain foreign pairs of eyes were able to read the legislation and share their judgment on it. And it would be remiss of me not to speak to that fact today, because when he said that they gave it an instantaneous clean bill of health, he spoke, ma'am, in a very tepid and albeit sincere, a very tepid and self-effacing way. What they actually said, ma'am, was that this is the best in class legislation. It is a model to the world. Mr. Speaker, Madam Deputy Speaker, as I said, may have been spared much of the Honourable Member's speech. But ma'am, during my meetings, I made it a point to listen to some of the things that were being said. For example, I took a break for lunch, and I had 15 minutes for lunch, ma'am. 1-5. And during those 15 minutes, I listened to a leader of the opposition, lamenting the fact that in the legislation there is a provision for criminal penalty to be associated with certain types of behavior in the fish market. And for that, he indicts the whole government and suggests, ma'am, that we, that doing so much for the fisheries sector in Barbados, are holding people in a degree of contempt. No, ma'am, I'm not talking about mischievous. I call it ignorance in high places. And I want to say, ma'am, that the Democratic Labour Party still persists in this instinct of wanting to take a low road to high office. Oh, Madam Deputy Speaker, I want you to apply your heart to wisdom. If you are selling cars, you are not going to have any legislation about likelihood of violent activity, because you got some cars there, people walking in between the motor cars, the cars park, it ain't going away. If you are, ma'am, going into a vendor's mall or a craft market, ma'am, people are sitting down among the craft and they're showing you what the necklace and the leather bracelet. You see me in one all the time, ma'am, I got on today, and all the different nice pieces. Oh, ma'am, then the issue about potential violence. But ma'am, when you are in a market setting anywhere in the world, you are dealing with a set of people who are, by virtue of the tools of trade, armed with a long knife to cut the fish. A cutlass in your hand, that is your tool of trade. And so therefore, ma'am, there must be a provision, and there is to be found in every piece of fisheries legislation that I know of on planet Earth, and I have been practicing law in this country, ma'am, for in excess of 20 years, that you want to ensure as a means of protection to the public and to people in the market itself, that if for any reason a noise or dispute breaks out and people are armed as part of their tool of trade, that an unfortunate situation does not take place. We have seen it happen in markets here. No, Madam Deputy Speaker, it boggles the mind when we are talking about a piece of legislation that is targeted at the transformation economically of a sector of people that have been rooted at the bottom of the socio-economic ladder in Barbados. That you don't want to confront that painful and agonizing social reality, but that you want to focus, ma'am, on a whimsical nonsense, a nonsense about what may or may not be an interpretation. And when guided by the acting leader of government business, he retreats into the fact that he has an opinion, and he knows that his opinion could be ruled out of order. No, ma'am, that is not a matter for me. I say this, that I also heard him talk about this government doing nothing for fishermen. No, it didn't take a lot of time. There's a fellow called Google. I went on this fellow called Google, ma'am. I hold him here in my hand. And in 5 minutes, ma'am, I was able to go back through the life of this administration. Duty-free concessions on gear and equipment to the fishery sector. We ain't do nothing. According to him, ma'am, we ain't do nothing. Ma'am, you would be surprised to discover that this government that ain't do nothing for fishermen in Barbados has put in place an annual maintenance subsidy to support repairs to vessels. An annual subsidy, ma'am. He says, ma'am, that we don't do anything for the fishery sector, but yet still there is subsidized ice to be found in the markets of this place. And I believe that that may have begun, ma'am, and during the tenure not of this illustrious minister, but his predecessor. Or maybe, ma'am, a subsidized fish vendor market space rental. No, ma'am, I didn't have to Google this because I know I was part of it. That during COVID, when everything was shut down, business interruption benefits were offered to the fisheries sector. We subsidize lockers, ma'am. We subsidize hollow operations. Madam Deputy Speaker, you will be stunned to realize that there is VAT-free fuel offered to the fisheries sector. But the government don't do nothing. Ma'am, there's a vessel lifting rebate to lift vessels out of the water, not to put them on Parkinson School field, not to put them on Foundation School playing field, but ma'am, to lift them out of the water and put them in a place of certain safety.
11.
I listened to the Honourable Member St. Michael South on that point. I don't have to go further. I don't have to go further. Except to say, ma'am, that I honestly believe that the Honourable Leader of the Opposition is sometimes wedded to a form of midsummer's madness. If I had said it, ma'am, if I was he and I had said, well, you should take them out of the water and put them on a playing field. And then it was drawn to me how foolish that statement is. I would have had the humility to say, or perhaps ought not to have said that. I wouldn't double down or triple down or quadruple down on it. But, ma'am, there is free vessel inspection, free fishing vessel inspection, free registration of fisheries workers, free berthing at landing sites and fishing harbor, free docking in the boat yards, grants to fisherfolk organizations, ma'am, subvention to the Barbados National Union of Fisherfolk Organizations, and duty-free on boats 4 years and younger. And I don't want to go on and on. Madam Deputy Speaker, I want to say to you, though, that I want to come to the wider point for me, and this is the export market opportunity. Ma'am, there's a thing called illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing. Simply put, I can use the example of some of the trawlers that come down this side of the world from places in Asia. And I suppose as Foreign Minister, I should not use this place to lambaste anybody's government. But we know, ma'am, that they come armed with 5-mile drift nets, raking up everything in the water and along the ocean floor in some cases. Weighted nets. And you take the little babies, you take those that ain't mature yet, and you take those that mature. They take the endangered species, ma'am, and those that are not endangered. And ma'am, the difficulty that we have is that we have to find a way of ensuring that that type of fishing is now regulated and that the species which are endangered are protected, ma'am. This piece of legislation speaks directly to that. And if there's no other reason why this legislation should shout out, scream out for support, ma'am, is the fact, ma'am, that it allows for us to have a sector which is now properly managed. And in addition to that, it allows, ma'am, now in a legislated way for our own weaknesses to be corrected. For a long time, ma'am, everybody knew about fishing, but nobody was talking about the way we manage the resource. For a long time, ma'am, we know that people going to sea, but we ain't talking, ma'am, about the way in which the gear is maintained, that the boats themselves have to be properly maintained. Madam Deputy Speaker, we are talking about a sector, ma'am, now that is going to be able to see the registration of vessels, both local and international. I want to say, ma'am, that the legislation that we see here today will shortly be joined, once it comes through Cabinet in a little while, with a review of the maritime boundaries legislation, where I, ma'am, will be going to my colleagues in Cabinet to secure their imprimatur and support, because we must now raise the level of penalties for people who violate our maritime space. And the little see sum of money that is there, ma'am, we will make a recommendation for it to be substantial, large, and therefore, ma'am, the penalty for doing these things must be greater. Now, ma'am, to better protect the environment, we're going to have fishing trawlers code of operations and focus on the earning viability of the fishing community and the environmental sustainability. Ma'am, I could think of nothing that has been more wholesome for this sector than these particular pieces of legislation. There are pieces of legislation, ma'am, which in my judgment have been long overdue. As I said to you, ma'am, they are holistic in the sense that they are speaking not only to the issues we have now, they are also addressing the sustainability issues that all of us must speak to, apparently except for the Democratic Labour Party in this time of climate crisis. Ma'am, it also is speaking to the value added of boat building, ma'am, fishing gear manufacture, ma'am, management of the resource, data collection, another weakness that we've had, and I can go on and on. Madam Deputy Speaker, I do not know that there has been at any stage in Barbados pieces of legislation that have so coalesced at one point in order to be an empowering impulse to a sector that is vital, none can deny, but a sector, ma'am, that has been crying out for empowerment. And I am privileged, ma'am. The only thing that I am sorry about is that I could not speak longer in this debate. But I want to warmly support it, I want to warmly welcome it, and I want to totally congratulate the Honourable Minister who has brought it here and his entire staff and all of those who have worked on this in the fisheries sector. I'm obliged to you, ma'am.
Honourable Minister of Tourism.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I too rise to speak in this debate and to join with other honourable members who have spoken in respect of this bill. Indeed, I want to support the Sustainable Fisheries Management and Development Bill and to say that the honourable member for Christchurch West Central has done a remarkable job in presenting to this honourable chamber the key components of this bill. But I must also congratulate the honourable member as well for setting the record straight. And I shall endeavour this evening as well to also show the contrast between the policies of a former Democratic Labour Party government and what this Barbados Labour Party administration has done. I know, Mr. Speaker, oftentimes you believe that history perhaps is repeating itself, because we recall when we had Hurricane Jeanette, we were faced with a similar position, but I will come back to that. But suffice to say that the framework for strengthening linkages between tourism and fisheries must be commended. Of course, we all know about the sustainable fish tourism as framed in the bill. It will certainly redound to the benefit of the tourism sector as well as to the local coastal and fishing communities, as well as for local domestic tourists as well, and tourists as well. Of course, the fish tourism includes not only maritime and freshwater fishing, but it also includes diving, exchange of fisheries, oriented cultural experiences, and of course, the sharing of traditional fisheries knowledge. Madam Deputy Speaker, I think it is well known all over the world that whenever you have any event or relating to fish, you always recognize that there's always a wonderful opportunity to showcase what you have. I recall, Mr. Speaker, Madam Deputy Speaker, I apologize. If you've been to Seattle, you will see that there was Pipes Fish Market. And as a result of Pipes Fish Market there, they would have developed a lot of motivational material. But it also allowed at that fish market in Seattle, in Washington, an opportunity for visitors to that state to go to go to the fish market and experience and have the experience of their lifetime. And I firmly believe that the plan set out in this bill will certainly help us to promote more of what we consider to be fish tourism as we continue our development. It is well known that there are a number of visitors who go to a destination and they seek out new and unique experiences. And of course, we can continue to generate even more revenue, not only from coastal areas where people depend on, for their livelihood, of course, on fisheries. In Barbados, we have a perfect mecca, as I refer to it sometimes, of oysters, where people have made not only earnings and a livelihood of that particular area, but that it has now become so iconic in Barbados that you have tourists on any given night, but in particular a night like tonight, Friday night, visiting the Oystins Bear Gardens and having the lifetime of their experience, thereby contributing to even more of a positive experience of Barbados. And when we look at all that we've done, and in particular, recognizing what we did here a couple of weeks ago, when we passed the Maritime Underwater Heritage Bill, a framework for developing Barbados's maritime heritage tourism sector. When that was passed in here and I spoke to the issues, I would have gone and I would have spoken at length about some of the opportunities. And therefore, when the Honourable Member for Christchurch West Central spoke earlier today, he spoke with passion, he spoke with a sense of commitment that I'm sure that all of us within the Labour Party, and for that, must be proud of. And therefore, I know that the fisherfolk in Barbados will continue to recognize all that he continues to do for the sector. But, Madam Deputy Speaker, there's one thing, and it has to do with the political history and the political record of the Barbados Labour Party. And I sat here and I took a few notes because it was absolutely important that we, in this Barbados Labour Party, that we continue to demonstrate our sincerity in terms of our long-term commitment, our growth, and the development of our fishing industry. And I know, Mr. Speaker, that when Madam Deputy Speaker, when we had Hurricane Beryl, it was one of those occasions where perhaps people initially, because whenever you have a crisis and you respond immediately, some people will criticize you and they will say that you did not attempt to manage it as smoothly as you would want. But at the end of the day, we are confident that the fishing folk now, based on what the minister and other members of his team would have done to not only to mitigate the crisis at hand, but to also demonstrate the support for the fishing sector. I recall, Madam Deputy Speaker, and the Barbados Labour Party has a very proud record of this. I'm sure that we will recall that when the late Sir Grantley Herbert, now the Right Excellent Sir Grantley Adams, entered the House of Assembly back in 1934, representing the parish of St. John, he did so, and what he also did in addition to advancing a number of opportunities, he was perhaps one of the first persons who ensured that he advanced the interests of fisherfolk in Barbados. And by that, you recall when the Universal Adult Suffrage Bill was passed back in 1951, that with the attainment of ministerial government in 1954, that the late Right Excellent Sir Grantley Herbert Adams would have appointed Sir Elway Tama as the first minister first minister of fisheries. And I say all that to say that from way back, from the introduction of ministerial government in Barbados, the Barbados Labour Party recognized that we had to have as ministerial responsibility someone capable of leading fisheries. And therefore, when we look at what we have accomplished over those years, you recall, Madam Deputy Speaker, that way back then, persons used to go and sail in what we call a sailboat. And then the Barbados Labour Party, through one of its leaders, the Right Excellent Sir Grantley Adams, pioneered the introduction of motorized fishing boats, as it were, in Barbados. And he did this because it was absolutely necessary that we demonstrate to the world that we could also catch up with the times and give people not only the livelihood that they required, but also introduce an aspect of safety. Because you recall when you go out to sail on a sailboat, that fishermen at that time could have only gone out for maybe a maximum of 4 hours offshore, and then they will have to return onshore with its challenges. But with the introduction of motorized boats, it was also an opportunity for fishermen now to even advance to sea, but do so in a very safe way. And therefore, when we had Hurricane Janet in 1955, again, we were faced with a similar situation where boats were damaged. And those boats that were damaged, the Barbados Labour Party administration at the time pursued policies not only in recognition of motorized vessels, but also provided loans back then for the fisherfolk who were badly affected by Hurricane Janet to ensure that they maintained their livelihood. And the Barbados Labour Party did so, not only to improve the debt, not only to improve of locals, but to improve the livelihood of persons, but also as an opportunity to build out the fisheries section as a department, as an opportunity for more employment. I may also add, Madam Deputy Speaker, that in 1942, the Barbados Labour Party made sure that we had a loan facility to replace and repair fishing boats damaged by rough seas. We also had back in 1944, the widening of the channel at landing sites at Concept Bay and the Crane. We also in 1945 had for the first time established fishing as an industry in Barbados, in the Barbados Development Plan. And of course, we could recall what happened in 1946 when we opened the first fish market. And Madam Deputy Speaker, you may ask, why am I going back to the history? Because it's important to show the contrast between what occurred then, what we have done as a government, as an administration, and what we are seeking to build out today. And when we look and see what we're doing today, Madam Deputy Speaker, we are now faced with Hurricane Beryl and the effects that it had on the coastline, and particularly the fisherfolk. The minister, along with the Prime Minister, would have put together, and the cabinet, of course, approving it, would have put together a package for the fisherfolk in Barbados, as we did during the passage of Hurricane Janet, as we've done when there were rough seas where we provided loans and other incentives. The Barbados Labour Party government, led by the minister responsible for fisheries, the Honourable Member for Christchurch West Central, set about in earnest to ensure that the fisherfolk in Barbados had not only financing, but that they also had the equipment to haul out the boats from the sea, to take them to wherever they had to be repaired in order for us to ensure that we maintain a fishing sector. And when you look back and see what the Honourable Member has done, I recall when I passed Fontebelle, and if you look, and if you come through by the Port Authority area, you look left or right, and you will see a number of fishing vessels that were there under repair. And when you pass there today, you can see the difference. The fact that the fishing boats are being repaired, they're being returned to sea, and what we are witnessing, especially with a very vibrant tourism sector, that the fishermen are going to work, they're fishing, they're landing the fish, and of course they're selling the fish not only to the locals, but they're also selling, as they have done for years, selling the fish to the tourism, the hotel sector. And I'm saying that the Honourable Member has to be congratulated because he's done an outstanding job in leading the recovery efforts. And therefore, the recovery efforts that we have seen today is as a direct result of his tenacity, his hard work, and his diligence in ensuring that we recover, and we recover in a very good position. So the recovery, Madam Deputy Speaker, has gone very well. And that is a credit, like I said, to the Minister and his team. And therefore, if we want to sustain an industry, we can only sustain an industry if you are faced with a crisis, that you recover from the crisis, but then you also take additional measures to sustain the fishing sector. And that is what the Honourable Member for Christchurch West Central has been doing. And Madam Deputy Speaker, I even go so far to say that this Barbados Labour Party has a wonderful record. For example, the Barbados Port, as we call it, the Bridgetown Port, would have made several investments into the fishing sector. For example, at Pile Bay, there was an investment out of its corporate social responsibility plan. It made a substantial investment to improve Pile Bay to what it is today. They also did a similar thing in Western at the Millie Eiffel complex. They have also gone all across Barbados, and they have been investing as part of their corporate social responsibility into plant and also infrastructure, a modern infrastructure, to ensure that the fisher folk have facilities that are, of course, not only modern, but that are first class. And I say all of that, Madam Deputy Speaker, as the Minister now continues to build and secure not only Barbados' coastline and the inner fishing basin over at the fisheries complex, because the Minister and the public must know this. The Minister would have spearheaded with the assistance of the port, right? A vessel, the MV Bay Pearl. And the MV Bay Pearl came to Barbados with 38,000 tons of granite boulders. And a lot of stones, and Madam Deputy Speaker, when you pass the mighty Granite Highway, if you're heading to Bridgetown, and you look to your left just before the traffic lights, you will see some stones there that you would not imagine that when you look at that weight would have been carried on a ship. But it's a fact. On the Bay Pearl, and it came through the Bridgetown Port, offloaded with all that weight, which tells you something about the Deepwater Harbor that the Barbados Labour Party administration constructed, led by Sir Grantley Herbert Adams at the time, right? And when you look and you see that as a result, and Barbadians perhaps would ask, why is it that you have so much stone there? But what the Minister is doing is that he secured an order of stone. He got the stone to Barbados safely, offloaded in some very heavy-duty trucks, transported to the holding area, and those stones will leave there, go in an area within what we call the Bridgetown Fisheries Complex. And why is the Minister doing this for the fisher folk? He is doing this to secure not only the inner basin, but to ensure we build some resilience, so that in the event that, and we never know, Madam, and we never know the waves that will sometimes come upon us. But what the Minister is doing with his team is that he's now trying to reinforce, as I would say, ring fence the area within the Bridgetown Fisheries Complex to ensure that in the event that we have a similar occurrence or similar event of whatever nature, that at least the wave energy will be contained, and therefore it would not have the impact that it had when we had Hurricane Beryl coming through. And this again, taking you back to history, is but another extension of the legacy of the Barbados Labour Party as it relates to fishing. And that no member of the Democratic Labour Party or any other critic can come in here and lay claim to a legacy that was started by the Barbados Labour Party, like I said, under the late, right excellent Grantley Herbert Adams. And we have to make sure that we say these things, because when the Deepwater Harbor was built, I believe it was built at the time at a cost of about $18 million. And today the Deepwater stands head and shoulders, although it needs some expansion. But it has never wavered, Madam Deputy Speaker. So the Minister is now here faced with an infraction that occurred. He must now fix, and he's going to fix it. And at the end of the day, the fisher folk of Barbados, and particularly those who use the facility at the Bridgetown fisheries complex will be extremely proud when they see what will be done there to help them secure not only their future, not only their fishing vessels, but also to ensure that the legacy of fishing remains strong in Barbados. And I want to thank the honourable member for Christchurch, West Central, again, because he needs to be thanked, because the amount of work that he's done within the fisheries sector. He must be commended. And I say to the honourable member that there will come a time, and he has to talk, Madam Deputy Speaker, and perhaps the time is right even for a fishing museum, because with all the work that has been done and the proud legacy of the Barbados Labour Party and all that we have done, and of course even without iconic flying fish, and all the able seamen and other fishermen who have made a major contribution to Barbados ought to be recognized for all that they have done within the fishery sector of Barbados. And I say to the minister that the fisher folk must thank you for not only the business interruption benefit that you provided them, not only with all the financial assistance, but all the work that you have done within the division of fisheries to ensure that you create a sustainable future for fishermen. And that is what, in part, this bill is about. This is not only about billing out opportunities for advancement, but it's also thinking about how sustainable we can and should be as a people in Barbados. And this sector, a very powerful sector in my view, because not only does it feed the population, not only does it allow for us to engage in advanced commerce, but what it does, Madam Deputy Speaker, is that it allows Barbadians to lay claim of a famous legacy. And I say to honourable members, and I will wind up, Madam Deputy Speaker, because I didn't intend to delay the House unduly, but it must be said. It must be said. And if any member decides to come in here and to criticize the efforts of what have been done, then in effect what they're doing is that they are criticizing the fishing sector. But if you come in here and say that you object to anything that was done in the division of fisheries insofar of the recovery efforts, then it is to say that you are not supportive of the fishing community, you're not supportive of the fishermen, and by extension, you have no vested interest in ensuring that the fish, that the fishermen go there and catch and bring to shore to help us not only with our dietary requirements, but to ensure that we can also even engage in exports and earn even more money from this sector. So I say, have no fear. The fishing folk, the Barbados Labour Party has always been there with you. The Barbados Labour Party will continue to be there with you. Any responsible government owes it to the fisher folk of Barbados not only to build sustainability, not only to build resilience, but to ensure that we carry forward the good work. And as we continue to contrast the work that we have done, and we have done a hell of a lot of work in the maritime sector, so much so that when you go back and check the records, back in 2018, you had a Democratic Labour Party administration that came to office between 2008 and 2018, and it was left to the Barbados Labour Party government when they came in 2018 to have an audit of everything that was required to be done within the maritime sector. And it was this Barbados Labour Party that took that audit after they had it completed and addressed a series of actions in order to ensure that we position the maritime sector to where it ought to be. And I will commend not only the member for Christchurch West Central, but also the member for St. Michael's South, who would have laid the groundwork for a lot of the work that you see us doing in the maritime sector. And there are several, and even though we have passed almost 9 bills debated in this chamber last year, another one earlier this year, but more to come, Madam Deputy Speaker, because when you look at the record of legislation, when you contrast the record of the Barbados Labour Party in terms of his legislative agenda in respect of maritime, and you cross-examine the record of the Democratic Labour Party, then certainly, Madam Deputy Speaker, you can say there's absolutely no comparison whatsoever. And that is the difference between a government that comes to work and work hard on behalf of its citizens versus those who would prefer to just utter some words in the hope that they will get a few votes, Madam Deputy Speaker. So therefore, we will go forth with faith, we will go forth with conviction and courage, knowing, and the fisher folk must know this as well, that their future is very safe with the Barbados Labour Party, and that the Barbados Labour Party shall never let them down. If we didn't let them down back in the 1940s and 50s, it will be a shame if we do so now, and we have no intentions of doing so. So I say to you, Madam Deputy Speaker, I say to this chamber, I commend the bill. I thank the Minister and his team for the incredible hard work. I thank the officers at the Chief Parliamentary Counsel's office and the Attorney General's chambers for all the hard work that they have done, not only in respect of this bill, but also other bills from the maritime sector that will continue to create that niche for Barbados. So I commend this bill, and I want to say, Madam Deputy Speaker, that the fisher folk can be rest assured that they are in safe hands with the Barbados Labour Party, and they need not look elsewhere. I'm obliged.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I beg to move the suspension in chamber until 6:45. For 5 minutes until 6:45.
Honourable members,
Go ahead.
the question is that this honourable chamber now make a break for 5 minutes. All honourable members in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it. This honourable chamber will now break until 6:45.